You didn't get the job, but instead of saying it hurts, you tell yourself it probably wouldn't have made you happy anyway, that the team seemed off, the commute was too far, or the work didn't really match your values. You weren't invited to the party, but you tell yourself those people aren't your crowd, that you prefer staying home, that you would have felt awkward if you had gone. You like someone who didn't like you back, but instead of facing that rejection, you decide they weren't your type after all, that their interests are shallow, that you were just bored when you liked them. That's rationalization. It's when you reshape the story after it ends so that it looks like you were in control all along, even if you were. Instead of saying, I wanted this and didn't get it, you build a clean explanation around why it's better that you didn't. You protect yourself from the sharp edges of disappointment by covering them in reasons. You make the pain look planned, and the thing is, it works. It makes the loss feel like a choice. It helps you avoid the shame or the sadness or the doubt that might come with asking, why wasn't I enough? It lets you keep your image of strength intact, but the cost is subtle. Every time you rewrite the story to erase your own vulnerability, you lose a piece of your honesty. You miss a chance to grow from the discomfort. You turn moments of real emotion into rehearsed detachment. And slowly, you stop trusting your own desires because everything you didn't get becomes something you claim you never wanted. Rationalization feels mature. It sounds logical, but deep down it's a quiet retreat from the truth, because the truth is messier. The truth is sometimes you try and you fail. Sometimes you want and you don't get. Sometimes it hurts, and that's okay. Pain doesn't make you weak. Admitting that you cared doesn't make you naive. It just makes you human. So when you hear yourself saying, it's fine, I didn't really want it anyway, ask yourself, are you being honest or just trying to feel less broken? You tell yourself that if something isn't perfect, it's worthless. If the date didn't go amazingly well, it was a disaster. If someone made a mistake, they're a terrible person. If you slipped once, then you failed completely. There's no in-between, no gray areas, no room for nuance. It's all or nothing, success or failure, love or hate, right or wrong. That's black and white thinking, and it's one of the most common ways your brain simplifies complex emotions so it doesn't have to deal with uncertainty. It shows up in small moments, like deleting a message thread with someone just because they annoyed you once, or deciding to quit a new habit because you missed one day. It also shows up in relationships when you idolize someone at first, then turn against them the moment they disappoint you. The world becomes divided into extremes. People are either for you or against you. You're either thriving or falling apart. Everything is either completely right or completely wrong. You use this kind of thinking because it gives you a sense of clarity. It's emotionally cleaner to say, this is bad, than to say, this is good in some ways and deeply flawed in others. It's easier to walk away from something that feels completely wrong than to navigate the discomfort of something that's halfway right. But the problem is, life isn't built in extremes. Most people aren't saints or villains. Most of your efforts won't be total success or complete failure. And when you think in black and white, you cut yourself off from progress, because progress happens in the messy middle. You stop trying after a setback because it feels like you've already lost. You give up on people after one mistake because they no longer fit your image of good. You either stay in denial or swing to despair, with nothing in between. Black and white thinking is a white lie you tell yourself because ambiguity is exhausting. Because it's uncomfortable to admit that people can hurt you and still care about you, that you can be proud of yourself and still have so much to work on, that something can be broken and still worth saving. But growth doesn't come from burning everything down when it isn't perfect. It comes from staying in the gray, sitting with discomfort, holding space for contradiction. So the next time you hear yourself thinking, this ruined everything, pause and ask, did it really? Or is it just harder to accept that most things are never entirely one thing? You say it's fine, but it's not. You smile and say do what you want, but there's a quiet bitterness behind the words. You leave a comment that sounds polite but lands like a slap. You forget to reply, but somehow only to the people you're upset with. You're not yelling, you're not starting fights, but something in your tone, your silence, your timing, it's loud enough to be felt. That's passive aggression. It's what you do when you're angry but don't feel safe or comfortable expressing it directly. Instead of saying, that bothered me, you express it sideways with sarcasm, distance, silence, or overly sweet politeness that clearly isn't real. And the strange thing is, you might not even realize you're doing it. It can feel like you're being calm, reasonable, even mature. You're not exploding, you're not creating drama, but under the surface, you're using subtle punishment to make the other person feel what you won't say. You do it because direct conflict is risky. Maybe you grew up in a place where expressing anger was punished or ignored. Maybe you learned early on that being nice keeps you safe, even when you're hurting. So instead of setting boundaries, you drop hints. Instead of speaking your truth, you pull away. Instead of saying no, you say yes and resent it later. Passive aggression is a white lie because it pretends everything's fine while quietly sabotaging the relationship. You get to protect your pride without looking confrontational. You get to release some pressure without admitting you're upset, but over time it poisons trust. People start to feel uneasy around you. They never know what you really feel. They sense tension they can't name. And you feel alone, misunderstood, unrewarded for all the anger you swallowed. The truth is, passive aggression keeps you stuck. You never get what you actually want because no one knows what that is. You never feel heard because you never really speak. And every time you fake a smile when you should set a boundary, you teach people to ignore your feelings. So next time you feel the urge to say it's fine when it's not, stop and ask, are you choosing peace or just avoiding discomfort while hoping someone else reads your mind? You tell someone they're overreacting when they're clearly upset. You say, that never happened, even though you remember it. You act like their memory is flawed, like they misunderstood, like they're imagining things. You shift the story just enough to make them question their version of events, not to protect them, but to protect yourself. That's gaslighting. It's when you make someone doubt their own perception, so you don't have to take responsibility for how your actions made them feel. It doesn't always come from cruelty. Sometimes it starts with panic. You feel cornered by the truth, so you twist it just enough to create distance. You say you're being dramatic when they confront you about something real. You say you're too sensitive when they express pain. You downplay what happened, deny the intensity, make them feel like they're the problem, not the event itself. You do it because facing the truth would mean admitting you hurt someone. It would mean acknowledging that your words landed harder than you intended, that your actions had consequences you didn't want to cause. So you choose the version of the story where you stay clean, and you convince them to believe it too. Gaslighting is a white lie dressed as clarity. You act like you're helping them see things more objectively, when really you're just rewriting reality so it fits your comfort zone. You benefit from their confusion. The less sure they are, the more control you have, but the cost is high. Over time, they stop trusting their own thoughts. They feel lost, small, constantly second-guessing themselves. They may even start apologizing for feeling anything at all. And you get to keep your hands clean, but only by slowly dismantling someone else's sense of truth. The worst part is gaslighting can become so habitual that you gaslight yourself. You start telling your own memory to shut up. You start believing your own edited version of events, and that's how the lie becomes your identity. So the next time you feel the impulse to say, that's not what happened, or you're remembering it wrong, pause for a second and ask, are you defending truth or just trying not to look guilty? You shrug and say it doesn't matter. You act like you didn't expect anything. You pretend the silence doesn't hurt, the rejection doesn't sting, the outcome doesn't disappoint you. You say things like whatever happens, happens, or I'm just going with the flow, even when you spend hours overthinking what could go wrong. You train your face not to react, your tone not to betray you, your body not to flinch, because the moment you show that you care, you feel exposed. This is fake detachment. It's when you pretend to be indifferent not because you are, but because it's safer than vulnerability. You tell yourself you're above it all, that you're emotionally untouchable, that nothing gets to you, but the truth is you care deeply and you're scared of what that means. You use this white lie as a shield, because caring opens the door to disappointment. If you admit you wanted something, then not getting it hurts more. If you show you're invested, then being ignored feels sharper. So instead of risking that, you kill the hope before anything else can. You pretend to be casual, ironic, aloof. You make jokes instead of confessions. You act like people are optional, like outcomes don't define you, like nothing anyone does can touch you. But deep down, you know this isn't strength. It's fear wearing cool clothes. It's emotional armor that's gotten so comfortable, you forget you're still carrying it. The lie gives you the illusion of control. If you don't care, then you can't be hurt. But you don't stop hurting, you just stop connecting. And over time, no one knows what matters to you because you've trained yourself to hide it even from yourself. The worst part is, when something finally does matter, you may be too far gone to show it. So ask yourself, are you truly indifferent, or have you just gotten really good at pretending not to bleed? You keep scrolling even though you're exhausted. You take another drink even though your head is already spinning. You message someone you swore you were done with. And every time that quiet voice in your mind tries to say, this is becoming a problem, you answer with the same sentence, I could stop any time. You say it casually, like it's a fact, like the control is yours and always has been. That sentence is the lock on the door you don't want to open. It keeps you from looking too closely, from admitting that the line between choice and compulsion might already be blurry. You say you're just taking the edge off, just relaxing, just filling time, but somehow you keep ending up in the same place, doing the same thing, telling yourself this is the last time again. I could stop any time is one of the most dangerous white lies because it gives you the comfort of control without requiring you to prove it. You don't stop. You don't even try to stop. But as long as you could, you don't have to face what it would mean if you couldn't. You use it to push away the fear that you might be dependent. You use it to keep the word addiction at a safe distance. You use it to stay in denial while everything around you quietly adjusts to your habit, your schedule, your mood, your relationships, your self-respect. The truth is, most people don't realize they've lost control until it's gone, and by the time they admit they can't stop, it's no longer a question. The lie isn't in the behavior, it's in the story you tell about it. The story where you're still in charge, still choosing, still totally capable of walking away whenever you want. So the question is simple. If you really could stop any time, why haven't you? You get rejected and the sting starts to build in your chest, but instead of letting yourself feel it, you go straight to war. You tell yourself they didn't deserve you anyway. You say they're immature or shallow or toxic. You decide they were never good enough, that they didn't recognize your value, that they'll regret it one day. You flip the script so fast, it almost looks empowering, but it's not. It's a defense. You turn disappointment into superiority, not because you believe it, but because it hurts less than wondering if something was wrong with you. This is one of the most tempting white lies because it feels strong. It sounds like confidence. It lets you escape the pain of rejection by rewriting it as a mistake on their part. And maybe sometimes that's true, maybe they really were blind to your worth. But when you say it every time, when it becomes your default reaction to being hurt, it stops being self-respect and starts being emotional avoidance. You use it to keep your pride intact, to avoid asking hard questions, to skip the part where you reflect on your role in the story, to numb the ache of being unwanted. The lie isn't that you have value, of course you do. The lie is that their rejection says nothing about you, when deep down, part of you fears it does. So you rush to invalidate them before they can make you feel invalidated. You call it boundaries, but it's often bitterness. You call it moving on, but it's often armor. And over time, this lie can make you isolated. Because if everyone who hurts you is beneath you, then who gets to stay close? So the next time you hear yourself saying, "They didn't deserve me," ask yourself, is that self-worth speaking, or is it just your pain pretending to be strong? You say something sharp, and when the other person flinches, you shrug and say, "I'm just being honest." You point out their flaws, highlight their mistakes, question their choices, and when they get defensive or hurt, you act surprised. You tell yourself that honesty is a virtue, that sugarcoating is fake, that real connection requires brutal truth. But somewhere deep down, you know this isn't about truth, it's about control. This white lie hides behind the appearance of integrity. It makes you feel like you're principled, brave, direct. You say things others are too polite to say, and that makes you feel powerful. But honesty without empathy isn't honesty, it's disguised aggression. You use this lie when you want to release your frustration without taking responsibility for its impact. You deliver the truth with just enough bite to make it sting, and then step back and blame them for not being able to handle it. You frame your harshness as clarity, your criticism as care. But in reality, you're often expressing judgment more than truth and distance more than connection. You do it because it lets you feel superior. It lets you feel like you're not hiding anything. But sometimes what you're really hiding is your discomfort with vulnerability, your inability to say, "I'm hurt," or "I need something," or "I feel rejected." Instead, you put up a mirror and call it honesty, hoping they'll feel what you're too afraid to say directly. The cost is real. Over time, people stop trusting your words even when they're true. They brace for impact when you speak. They feel examined, not understood. And you start confusing bluntness with depth and isolation with clarity. So when you say, "I'm just being honest," ask yourself, are you actually sharing truth, or just using it to push someone away without having to admit you're scared to be close? You feel that knot in your chest, that shift in your mood, that moment where something lands wrong, but instead of acknowledging it, you immediately downplay it. You say, "It's not a big deal," even though you've been thinking about it all day. You say, "I'm fine," even though your energy has dropped and your voice is tight. You laugh it off, brush it aside, try to move past it quickly, as if ignoring it will make it disappear. This is one of the softest, most socially acceptable white lies, and also one of the most damaging in the long run. Because when you tell yourself something isn't a big deal over and over, you stop learning how to recognize what actually matters to you. You convince yourself that your feelings are exaggerated, that your reactions are silly, that nothing should ever get under your skin. You become emotionally numb in the name of being reasonable. And maybe you learned to do this because in the past, when you spoke up, it was met with dismissal or mockery or silence. Maybe you were told to toughen up or not to make a scene, or that other people have it worse. So you learned to swallow things quickly. You learned that being low maintenance means being liked, that being chill means being safe. But the cost of that lie is internal. You start losing track of your boundaries. You start doubting your gut. You stay in situations that hurt because you've told yourself it's not worth the fuss. You disconnect from your own signals. You become the kind of person who can't even tell when something is a big deal because you've trained yourself not to feel the difference. And eventually, something truly serious happens, and you're still saying, "It's fine," because you don't know how to say anything else. So when you hear yourself downplaying your own experience, pause and ask, are you being calm, or are you being quiet because you don't believe your emotions deserve a voice? You say you've moved on, you tell your friends you're done thinking about it. You delete the photos, erase the messages, maybe even block the person and convince yourself that these actions equal closure. You say you've let go, that you've healed, that it doesn't affect you anymore, and maybe on the surface, it really seems that way. But underneath, the story still lives, the memory still lingers. Certain songs still sting, certain names still catch in your throat, certain nights still bring it all back when you least expect it. Saying "I'm over it" becomes a white lie you tell yourself, not because you are, but because you're tired of feeling stuck, tired of looking weak, tired of admitting that something still has power over you. This lie gives you relief. It allows you to function. It helps you show up to work, smile at strangers, keep moving, and sometimes that's necessary. But if you say it too soon, too often, too forcefully, it becomes a way to shut yourself down, a way to avoid grieving fully, a way to avoid asking why it still hurts. You use it because sitting in pain makes you feel exposed, unproductive, messy. And you were probably taught that moving on means forgetting, that healing means silence, that strength means being unaffected. So instead of processing what's real, you perform the version of yourself who's already fine. But being over it isn't about pretending it never mattered. It's about integrating what happened without erasing it. It's about letting the story be part of you without letting it control you. And that takes time, honesty, and the courage to say, "I'm not okay yet," even if no one else wants to hear it. So when you find yourself saying, "I'm over it," pause and ask, are you actually done feeling, or just done admitting that you still do? You come home and collapse onto the bed. Someone asks if you're okay and you say you're just tired. You cancel plans, avoid messages, pull away from people who care, and every time someone notices the change in you, you give the same answer. "I'm just tired." It sounds reasonable. It sounds neutral. It doesn't invite more questions. It doesn't make you look weak. But deep down, you know it's not just about sleep. You're not just physically exhausted, you're emotionally drained, mentally overloaded, quietly unraveling in ways you don't want to explain. Saying you're tired is a white lie that keeps everything vague and safe. It lets you acknowledge that something's wrong without actually confronting what that something is. Maybe it's sadness, maybe it's loneliness, maybe it's burnout or rejection or fear that you're falling behind. But instead of naming it, you fold it all under the label of tiredness, as if rest could fix what's breaking inside you. You use this lie because it buys you space. People won't press further. No one challenges exhaustion. It makes you seem functional even when you're shutting down. And the truth is, sometimes even you don't know what's really going on, you just feel heavy, unmotivated, disconnected. Tired becomes the mask you wear when your emotional bandwidth is gone. But the longer you wear it, the harder it becomes to reach out. People stop asking. You stop checking in with yourself. You forget what it feels like to say, "I'm not okay," and be met with understanding instead of pressure. So when you hear yourself say, "I'm just tired," pause for a moment and ask, what are you actually carrying that sleep won't solve? You tell yourself you're fine on your own. You repeat it like a mantra, that you're independent, self-sufficient, better off without attachments. You say you don't want to rely on anyone, don't expect anything, don't need anyone to show up for you. It sounds strong, it sounds fearless, it sounds like freedom. But the truth is, this isn't always strength. Sometimes it's fear in disguise. You say you don't need anyone because you've been let down before, because you've been vulnerable and it backfired. Because you've depended on people who walked away, and now you've decided it's safer never to depend at all. This white lie protects you from the pain of unmet needs. It helps you pretend that connection is optional, that intimacy is a luxury, not a basic human hunger. It gives you control. If you need nothing, no one can disappoint you. If you expect nothing, no one can break your heart. But the problem is, you're not actually built that way. You're human. You need closeness, support, presence. You need to be seen and heard and held. And when you deny that, you don't become free, you become isolated. You create a version of yourself that looks untouchable on the outside but feels invisible on the inside. You convince others you're fine alone, then resent them for believing you. Over time, you forget how to ask for help. You forget how to let someone in, and you start mistaking loneliness for independence. So the next time you hear yourself say, "I don't need anyone," ask yourself, is that your strength speaking, or just your fear building another wall? You start to feel off, anxious, sad, overwhelmed, and instead of acknowledging it, you minimize it. You say, "It's probably nothing," or "I'm just being dramatic." You tell yourself you're overthinking, that you're too sensitive, that other people have it worse. You try to dismiss the feeling before it takes root. You tell yourself, "It's all in my head," as if that makes it less real. But here's the truth, everything is in your head. That's where emotions live. That's where perception happens. Saying it's in your head doesn't make it imaginary. It just makes it easier to ignore. This white lie is subtle, but it trains you to doubt your own experience. You start believing that if you can't explain your feelings with logic or evidence, then they don't count. You become your own skeptic, invalidating yourself before anyone else gets the chance. You do this because it's safer than facing the fact that something's wrong and you might not know how to fix it. it gives you the illusion of control. If it's just in your head, then maybe you can push it away, think it out of existence, distract yourself until it fades. But what actually happens is that it lingers. You stop trusting your instincts. You silence emotions that are trying to guide you. You push down needs that don't come with clear explanations. And the more you do this, the harder it becomes to recognize what's real. You might even reach a point where you feel numb, not because you're healed, but because you've trained yourself not to listen. So the next time you feel something stirring inside and you hear yourself say, "It's all in my head," pause and ask, "Since when did that mean it doesn't matter?" You send a message, wait a few hours, check your phone again. You tell yourself they're probably just caught up with something, work, errands, life. You try not to overthink it. You try to stay calm. You remind yourself not to be one of those people who reads too much into silence. But as the hours stretch into a day, then two, then more, something shifts inside you. That familiar ache returns. You start to replay the last conversation in your head, searching for clues. You start asking yourself if you said something wrong, if you came on too strong, if you imagine the connection. But instead of admitting that it hurts, instead of facing the possibility that you're being ignored or slowly phased out, you default to the safest, softest explanation you know: they're just busy. You say it out loud, you tell your friends, you repeat it in your mind like a lullaby, because the alternative is harder to hold. The alternative means you might care more than they do. That maybe you weren't as close as you thought, that maybe their silence is the message. This is one of the most common white lies we use in relationships, especially the kind that are undefined, the almosts, the situationships, the fragile friendships, the people we're too afraid to lose by asking for clarity. They're just busy lets you avoid confrontation. It lets you keep hope alive without risking rejection. It lets you pretend that everything is okay, even when your gut is telling you it's not. You use it because being ignored triggers something deeper: the fear of not mattering, the shame of being forgotten, the anxiety of being too much or not enough. And rather than face that, you protect yourself with a story that sounds logical. After all, everyone is busy, right? The world moves fast, people get overwhelmed, phones die, notifications pile up. But here's the part you often ignore: people make time for what they care about. Even when life is hectic, even when they're stretched thin, they find ways to show up if it matters to them. A 2-second reply, a late-night check-in, a voice note saying, "Hey, I'll reach out soon." Silence, on the other hand, is often not about busyness, it's about priorities. And when you keep telling yourself they're just busy, you postpone the moment where you have to accept what they're actually showing you, that you're not in the place in their life that you thought you were, that maybe you're not even on the list. The longer you believe the lie, the deeper the disappointment when the truth finally arrives. And over time, you teach yourself that your needs are too needy, that waiting in silence is better than risking an honest question, that pretending you're okay is more important than finding out if you actually are. But honesty is not the enemy, it's the way out of limbo. So next time you hear yourself say, "They're probably just busy," ask yourself, are you giving them the benefit of the doubt, or are you giving yourself one more reason not to let go? You say it with a smile that doesn't quite reach your eyes. Someone asks if you're okay, and your answer comes out a little too fast: "I'm fine, really." You might even laugh a little, wave it off, change the subject. You keep your tone light, your posture calm, your energy just high enough to convince them not to ask again. And most people won't. Most people will take your word for it, not because they believe you, but because they don't want to push. And that's exactly why you say it, to avoid being pushed. This is one of the most practiced white lies in everyday life, the kind that slips out automatically. You say you're fine not because you are, but because it feels safer than unpacking the truth. Maybe you don't want to burden anyone. Maybe you don't trust that they'd stay if you told them how heavy things really are. Or maybe, deep down, you've learned that being fine is easier than being real. This lie gives you space. It helps you keep your guard up. It allows you to stay composed, to keep functioning, to avoid vulnerability. But over time, it also isolates you. Because every time you say, "I'm fine," when you're actually not, you teach people not to look closer. You make it harder for others to reach you and harder for yourself to feel seen. You begin to build a life where everything looks okay on the outside, but nothing feels connected on the inside. You show up, you smile, you perform wellness, and then you go home and feel invisible even to yourself. What makes this lie so powerful is that it works. It protects you from the discomfort of emotional exposure. It lets you keep moving without slowing down to process what you're carrying. But it also keeps you stuck, because healing doesn't start until honesty does. And if you never say, "Actually, I'm not fine," then no one can meet you in the place where you really are. You end up surrounded by people who believe in the version of you that you created just to survive. So the next time the words "I'm fine" start to come out of your mouth, pause and ask, what would happen if, just once, you told the truth instead? Not everything, not all at once. Just enough to let someone actually find you. You get hurt, disappointed, rejected, and instead of feeling shocked, you go straight to certainty. You say, I knew this would happen, like it was inevitable, like you saw it coming all along. Maybe you even warned yourself. Maybe you told your friends you weren't getting your hopes up. You built a quiet buffer between you and the outcome so that when it finally crashed, you could meet it with something colder than sadness, resignation. This is a white lie wrapped in fake foresight. It tells you that you were never really vulnerable, that you were too smart to be caught off guard, that your walls were up and that makes you the one in control. But the truth is you didn't know you hoped. You hoped it would turn out better. You let yourself want something even if you tried not to show it. And when it fell apart, you didn't want to feel the sting of having believed. So you reached for this sentence like a shield. I knew it. You say it to make the hurt feel smaller, to reframe the loss as proof of your realism. But it's not realism, it's protection. You use it to distance yourself from your own vulnerability. You rewrite the story so that you were never invested, never naive, never surprised. Because surprise makes you look foolish, and looking foolish is sometimes scarier than being hurt. This lie also protects your ego. If you tell yourself you saw it coming, then you can pretend you weren't really attached. That you stayed detached, cautious, smart. But detachment doesn't erase emotion, it just postpones it. And under the surface, the sadness is still there. The disappointment is still real. You just refuse to admit it because saying, I hoped this would be different, is so much harder than pretending you were right about its failure. Over time, this mindset starts to shape how you approach everything. You expect the worst to protect yourself. You walk into new situations already holding the exit door open. You tell yourself that being cynical is safer than being let down, but all it really does is keep you from ever fully showing up. So the next time you hear yourself say, I knew this would happen, pause and ask, are you describing the truth, or trying to bury the fact that you were brave enough to care? You tell the story carefully. You say that the two of you agreed it was time, that things just faded, that no one did anything wrong, no one got hurt, no one left anyone, you both simply decided to end it. It sounds clean, balanced, mature, but the more you repeat it, the more it starts to feel like a performance. Because deep down, you know that's not the whole truth. Maybe you were the one who wanted more and they didn't. Maybe they pulled away and you agreed just to keep some dignity. Maybe you sensed it was over but still hoped they'd fight for it. Saying it was mutual becomes your way of rewriting that imbalance. This white lie gives you the illusion of equality where there wasn't any. It smooths the edges of a break that was jagged. It allows you to exit the story with your pride intact, as if no one got left behind. You say it to others so they won't ask questions. You say it to yourself so you don't have to face the grief of being wanted less. It's a convenient narrative, two adults parting ways, no drama, no damage. But behind that story often hides a quiet ache, because real endings are rarely symmetrical. One person almost always lets go first. One person feels it more. And when you pretend otherwise, you rob yourself of the chance to heal honestly. You skip the part where you admit that it hurt, that you still wonder what you did wrong. That part of you wanted to stay, even when they didn't. This lie isn't just about avoiding pain, it's about avoiding humiliation. It's easier to say you agreed than to say you were left. But closure doesn't come from pretending it didn't matter. It comes from telling the truth, not to them, maybe not even out loud, but at least to yourself. Because until you stop saying we both felt it, you won't allow yourself to feel your part fully. So when you hear yourself say, it was a mutual decision, pause and ask, are you describing what really happened, or just protecting yourself from what it would mean if you weren't the one who let go? You see them laughing with someone else, or talking to a person they once mentioned in passing, or posting a picture that makes you pause a little too long and the feeling rises. It's quiet, quick, sharp, a twist in your stomach, a change in your breathing. But instead of naming it, you swallow it, you shake your head, you tell yourself you're not jealous, you say you're above that, that you trust them, that it's not a big deal. You say you're not the type to get possessive, and maybe you even believe it for a moment. But later the unease lingers. You become colder without meaning to. You ask small, calculated questions. You scroll a little too deep. You analyze things you swore you didn't care about. I'm not jealous is the lie you tell to stay composed, to stay likable, to stay emotionally untouched, because jealousy makes you feel exposed. It makes you feel immature, insecure, needy. And if you've been taught that needing someone too much is dangerous, that jealousy is irrational, that it scares people away, then it becomes easier to deny it than to sit with it. You use this lie to maintain your image of emotional control, to stay above the messiness, to keep your pride from cracking. But jealousy, when ignored, doesn't disappear, it distorts. It turns into suspicion or passive withdrawal or resentment you can't quite explain. It pushes you to test boundaries without admitting why. And it separates you from the part of yourself that just wants to feel close, safe, chosen. The truth is, jealousy isn't proof that something's wrong with you. It's proof that something matters. It reveals where your fear lives, fear of being replaced, forgotten, outgrown. When you deny it, you miss a chance to understand yourself, to say, this made me feel small, or I'm scared I'm not enough, or I want to be their favorite and I'm afraid I'm not. That kind of honesty is raw, but it's also real. And only what's real can be soothed. So the next time you feel that flicker and hear yourself say, "I'm not jealous," ask, what would happen if you were brave enough to be? You say it with certainty. You've deleted the photos, unfollowed them, cleared the messages, maybe even changed your routines just enough so nothing reminds you of them anymore. You tell your friends it's in the past. You say you wish them well, that you've grown, that the chapter is closed. And maybe parts of that are true. You're no longer checking their profile every day. You're not crying in the same way you used to. The sharpness of the pain has dulled. But late at night, when no one's around, something small can still undo you. A smell, a phrase, a place, a dream you didn't invite. And for a few seconds the memories come back with colors you thought had faded, but you shake it off. You remind yourself you've moved on, because the thought of not moving on, of still being attached to someone who let you go or chose someone else or simply drifted away, feels humiliating. This white lie isn't about lying to others, it's about holding yourself together. You tell it so you can feel like you're making progress, so you can function, so you don't have to admit that something inside you still flinches when their name comes up. You tell it because you're tired of being stuck, tired of hurting, tired of waiting for closure that may never come. But the problem with saying you've moved on before you're ready is that it doesn't allow you to fully grieve. It skips over the anger, the confusion, the acceptance. It keeps you from asking why it still hurts or what that pain is trying to teach you. Moving on isn't a switch. It's a slow reorganization of everything you believed about love, about connection, about yourself. And real healing doesn't always look clean. Sometimes you move on logically before you do emotionally. Sometimes the idea of being over it becomes a role you play because you're scared of how long real grief might last. But pretending you've moved on doesn't make the past disappear, it just delays the day you finally sit with what still echoes. So when you say, "I've moved on," ask yourself, are you walking forward or just running from what you don't want to feel anymore? You mess up again, you get defensive during a conversation. You shut down when someone gets too close. You avoid a responsibility, lash out without warning, disappear when things get difficult. And when someone brings it up gently with care with the hope that you'll try to understand, you shrug. You say, "This is just who I am." Maybe you even say it with pride, like it's a declaration of honesty, of self-acceptance. But the truth is, it's not honesty, it's a shield. This white lie allows you to avoid accountability by turning your patterns into personality. You take the things you've never addressed, the fears, the triggers, the defenses, and rebrand them as identity. You make inflexibility sound like authenticity. You make unhealed behavior sound like self-knowledge. You use this phrase to freeze your growth, to avoid the discomfort of change, because change is hard. It requires looking closely at your habits, your reactions, your history. It requires admitting that you've hurt people not because you're bad, but because you've been carrying wounds you haven't faced. And when you say, "This is just who I am," what you're really saying is, "Please don't ask me to look deeper." You use the lie because it gives you stability. It protects you from shame. It lets you stay where you are, surrounded by the illusion of self-awareness. But real self-awareness is never static. It includes the willingness to evolve, to question your defaults, to unlearn what no longer serves you. And when you refuse to do that, you end up stuck in a version of yourself that may no longer fit, a version built on survival, not choice. This lie also pushes people away, because when someone loves you enough to want better for you and all you give them is, "This is who I am," you're not being authentic, you're being unavailable. So the next time those words rise to your lips, pause and ask, are you speaking from self-acceptance or from fear that you're not capable of becoming someone more? You feel the sting of what they said or what they didn't say, the thing they forgot, the thing they ignored, the thing they did even after you asked them not to. It cuts, maybe not deeply, but sharply enough to make you flinch. And before the pain even settles, you rush to excuse it. You say, "They didn't mean to hurt me." You say it like it's a fact, like intention is all that matters. You try to convince yourself that because it wasn't malicious, it doesn't count. That because they're a good person, because they've had a rough week, because they didn't know better, the damage isn't real. But it is. That's what makes this lie so seductive. It lets you hold on to the connection while ignoring the cost. It lets you avoid conflict by making pain feel optional. You don't have to confront them. You don't have to ask for change. You just minimize the impact and keep the peace. You use this lie to protect the relationship, but in the process, you abandon yourself. You start to think your feelings only matter if the other person meant to cause them. You start to believe that unintentional hurt is hurt you're not allowed to name, so you stay quiet, you keep showing up, you let the pattern repeat, and little by little, resentment builds in the silence. The problem isn't that they didn't mean to hurt you, the problem is that they did, and if you never say anything, how will they know? How will they learn where your boundaries are, what matters to you, what leaves a bruise even if it wasn't a punch? This white lie keeps relationships intact on the surface but brittle underneath, because intention doesn't erase impact, and if someone cares about you, they won't want to hurt you even accidentally more than once. So the next time you whisper, "They didn't mean to," ask yourself, why are you trying so hard to protect their character instead of your own heart? Something goes wrong, the argument drags on, the silence gets longer, the trust wears thin, and your first instinct is to look outward. You replay everything they said, everything they did. You think about how they twisted your words, how they overreacted, how they made you feel like the bad one. And somewhere inside, quietly but firmly, the sentence forms, "I'm not the problem." You hold on to it like a lifeline, because if you're not the problem, then you don't have to change. You don't have to question your tone, your patterns, your reactions. You don't have to do the work of self-examination. This white lie is comforting because it lets you keep your self-image untouched. It allows you to stay the victim, the reasonable one, the person who just wants peace while the other person causes all the chaos. And sometimes that's partially true. Not every dynamic is balanced, not every conflict is shared. But when you always default to "it's not me," you shut the door on growth. You avoid seeing how your silence, your avoidance, your defensiveness, your inability to listen, your need to be right, how all of that might be part of the pattern too. You use this lie because self-reflection can feel like self-blame. You think that admitting fault means admitting you're flawed, weak, unworthy. But it doesn't. It means you're human. And it means you care enough to stay conscious of the impact you have, even when your intentions are good. Relationships don't fall apart because one person is the problem. They unravel when both people stop looking in the mirror. This lie protects your ego, but it keeps you stuck in cycles you can't see. You keep attracting the same situations, the same frustrations, the same endings, because you've decided they're the problem every time. So the next time you find yourself saying, "I'm not the problem," pause and ask, are you defending your pride or avoiding the part of yourself that still has something to learn? You say something sharp, maybe sarcastic, maybe a little cruel. You tease someone about the way they look or speak or feel. You make a joke about their insecurity, their past, their soft spots, and when they flinch or go quiet or ask you why, you brush it off with 4 words that shut everything down. It's just a joke. You smile, you laugh, you pretend to be confused by their reaction. And if they push further, you act like they're the problem, too sensitive, too emotional, too serious. But deep down, you know it wasn't just a joke. It was a release. A disguised expression of judgment, frustration, envy, or discomfort, masked as humor so you wouldn't have to take responsibility for the way it landed. This white lie is one of the most socially accepted forms of emotional avoidance. You get to say what you want without consequences. You get to test boundaries without naming intentions. You get to call out someone's flaws while still looking like the fun one. You use it to deflect. To stay in control, to avoid the awkwardness of being direct about what you're really feeling. Maybe you're irritated with them, maybe they're getting too close, maybe their confidence makes you uncomfortable, so you make a joke, but it's not really about laughter, it's about power. And the moment they try to name that, you gaslight them with humor, you make them doubt their reaction, you turn their discomfort into the punchline. But here's the truth, if your joke only works when someone else is the target, it's not a joke, it's a mask, a shield, a subtle weapon disguised as wit. And every time you use it, you send a message that your comfort matters more than their safety, that you're unwilling to be wrong, that you'd rather mock than engage. Over time, people stop feeling safe around you. They laugh along, but they flinch first. They choose their words carefully. They smile through the sting. And you start losing intimacy without realizing why. Because connection doesn't grow where people have to guard themselves from your sense of humor. The truth is, jokes are powerful. They can bring people closer or quietly push them away. They can be a form of love or a form of fear. So the next time you say something that makes someone wince, and you feel tempted to dismiss it with, "Relax, it's just a joke," pause and ask, are you really trying to be funny, or are you just afraid of saying what you actually mean? You catch yourself falling short, maybe you procrastinate again, lie about something small, lash out at someone you care about, and just as the guilt begins to rise, you reach for a familiar thought. You tell yourself, "At least I'm not like them. Not like that coworker who always talks behind people's backs, not like that ex who cheated, not like your friend who always plays the victim." You build a mental list of worse behaviors, worse choices, worse people, and you stack yourself above them like a safety net. This white lie is a quiet defense. It lets you escape the discomfort of your own flaws by comparing them to someone else's. It doesn't fix anything, it doesn't make you grow, it just makes you feel better for a moment. You use it when you don't want to be fully honest about your actions, when accountability feels too heavy. When the gap between who you are and who you want to be feels too wide to look at directly. So instead of asking, "Was I fair? Was I kind? Was I true to myself?" you ask, "Was I better than them?" And if the answer is yes, or at least not as bad, you feel safe again. But that safety is shallow, because growth doesn't come from being less toxic than someone else. It comes from being more honest than you were yesterday. The problem with this lie is that it creates a hierarchy of morality where none is needed. It makes you believe that as long as someone else is worse, you don't have to change. It becomes a ceiling on your potential, a wall between you and real reflection, and over time it chips away at your integrity. You start doing things you once judged in others slowly, slightly, justifiably, and every time you catch yourself, the same thought returns, at least I'm not like them. But who are you like? Who are you when no one's watching? Who are you when there's no one to compare yourself to? Those are the questions that matter, because your character isn't measured by the flaws you don't have, it's defined by the ones you're willing to face. So the next time you hear yourself thinking, at least I'm not like them, ask, are you comparing to feel honest, or just to avoid becoming the person you'd rather forget you already are? You say it with pride, maybe even a little defiance. You tell yourself everything happened the way it was meant to, that every mistake was a lesson, that every choice, even the painful ones, made you who you are. You repeat the phrase like a badge of emotional maturity, I don't regret anything. And on the surface, it sounds strong, wise, unapologetically human. But underneath, there's often a truth you're avoiding. You do have regrets. There are words you wish you hadn't said, silences you wish you had broken, chances you wish you'd taken, people you wish you had treated differently. You remember the turning points where fear won, the moments where you betrayed your own instincts, the patterns you saw too late. But instead of sitting with that weight, you try to reframe it. You say it was all part of the journey, that you had to go through it to learn. And maybe that's true, but learning from something doesn't mean you have to pretend you're glad it happened. Regret is not weakness, it's awareness. It's the mind revisiting what the heart didn't know how to hold the first time around. Saying you don't regret anything is a white lie you tell yourself so you don't have to reopen old wounds, so you don't have to admit that parts of your past still ache when you think too long about them. You use the lie to protect your identity, to avoid shame, to maintain the illusion that you've made peace with everything. But real peace includes the ability to say, I wish I'd done better. Regret doesn't erase your growth, it proves that growth was needed. And when you deny it completely, you miss a chance to reconcile with who you used to be. You silence the voice inside that's still asking for understanding. The lie might sound empowering, but over time, it disconnects you from the parts of yourself that still need forgiveness. So the next time you say, I don't regret anything, pause and ask, are you claiming strength, or just trying not to feel sorry for the version of you who didn't know what you know now? You cancel plans and tell yourself it's because you enjoy solitude. You spend the evening scrolling, half distracted, half numb, and call it rest. You watch people laugh in restaurants, share inside jokes, lean on each other, and you say to yourself, that's not what I need. You convince yourself that being alone is a lifestyle choice, not a wound, that your independence is enough, that you're above the kind of connection that comes with messiness, unpredictability, compromise. I'm not lonely, I just like being alone is a white lie that sounds mature, self-sufficient, even admirable. And sometimes it's true. Solitude can be nourishing. You can find peace in your own company. But when that sentence becomes a habit, when it starts showing up every time you feel that quiet ache in your chest, it stops being a truth and starts being a shield. You say it to avoid what loneliness might be trying to tell you, that you want to be seen, that you want to be chosen, that you want to be known beyond what you show the world. You use the lie to escape the discomfort of admitting that you miss connection, especially when it hasn't always been kind to you. Maybe people have let you down. Maybe closeness has always felt like danger. Maybe you've been told that needing others is weakness, so you rebrand your longing as strength. You call distance freedom. You call disconnection clarity. But the cost of this lie is slow and quiet. You start to feel disconnected even from yourself. You stop reaching out. You convince yourself that no one would really understand anyway. And eventually you can't tell the difference between being at peace and being emotionally numb. The truth is, you can enjoy being alone and still feel lonely. You can be independent and still crave closeness. Those two things aren't contradictions, they're both part of being human. So the next time you hear yourself say, I just like being alone, ask, are you honoring your solitude or hiding inside it? You say it like it's your armor, like it makes you untouchable. You post something bold, maybe a little provocative, and if someone criticizes you, you smile and reply, I don't care what people think. You wear clothes that grab attention, make choices that confuse others, walk away from things most people would hold on to, and every time you feel someone judging you, you repeat that sentence again and again, louder and louder, until it becomes your whole personality. You turn it into a badge of honor, a declaration of freedom. You tell yourself that caring about opinions is a weakness, that people who worry about how they're seen are shallow, that the real strength is in not needing anyone's approval. And maybe that's what you've always wanted to believe, that you've built something unshakable inside yourself, something that doesn't flinch when eyes are on you. But the truth is more complicated, because if you really didn't care what people thought, you wouldn't have to say it so often. You wouldn't feel the need to remind everyone and yourself that their opinions don't touch you. You wouldn't have to turn it into a performance. This white lie works because it gives you power. It helps you feel strong when you're vulnerable. It makes you feel bold when underneath there's hesitation. It's the story you tell to cover the deeper truth that you do care, that you wish you didn't care, that you hate that you care, but somewhere inside it still affects you. And so instead of exploring that, you build a wall. You reject other people's judgments before they have a chance to land. You dismiss their words, their concerns, their insight, even when it's valid. You call it confidence, but sometimes it's just a refusal to listen. You block out feedback because it's easier than risking the possibility that someone might be right about you. Because what if they see something you've tried to hide? What if they reflect something back that you're not ready to face? That's when this lie starts to isolate you. It doesn't just protect you from judgment, it protects you from connection. Because the truth is, not all opinions are the same. Not all criticism is toxic. Not every voice that disagrees with you is out to tear you down. Some people see you clearly. Some people want the best for you. But when you live in "I don't care what people think," you train yourself to ignore everyone. You lose the ability to filter, to tell the difference between noise and wisdom. And slowly you stop letting anyone reach you at all. Even the people who love you. Even the people who want to understand. Even the parts of yourself that are asking to be seen. You push them all away in the name of freedom. But what kind of freedom requires you to constantly defend it? What kind of confidence needs to be proven every time someone disagrees? If you're really secure in who you are, you don't need to shout it. You don't need to argue with people in your head long after the conversation ends. You don't need to wear rebellion like a costume. You just live, you move through the world with a quiet kind of clarity. And yes, you care what people think, but you also know how to hold that gently. You know how to listen without bending. You know how to receive input without letting it define you. The problem isn't caring, the problem is pretending that you don't. Because pretending turns your whole life into a defensive game. You build a version of yourself that's based on resistance, not truth. You start doing things not because they matter to you, but because they upset the people whose opinions you're trying to avoid. You become reactive, performative, and over time you lose track of what you actually want, because you're too busy proving that you're not trying to please anyone, and in doing that, you end up shaped by them anyway, just in reverse. The people who truly don't care what others think rarely have to say it. They're not disconnected from the world, they're just rooted enough in themselves to stay steady when it sways. They're not loud, they're not theatrical, they don't need the world to agree with them to feel whole, but they also don't need to burn it down, they don't need to reject connection to feel free. And you're allowed to want approval, you're allowed to feel hurt when you're misunderstood. You're allowed to care what your friends think, what your parents think, what strangers online think. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. The key is not to pretend that you don't care. The key is to understand how much it matters, why it matters, and whose opinions are actually worth listening to. Not all voices are equal. Not all criticism is rooted in truth, but some of it is. And if you block it all out in the name of independence, you miss the chance to grow, to connect, to learn something you didn't see on your own. So the next time you hear yourself say, "I don't care what people think," pause and ask, who are you? You trying to convince them or you? And if it's you, then maybe it's time to admit that caring doesn't make you small. Pretending not to, that's what keeps you from becoming who you really are. Something feels off, you bring it up gently, hesitantly, maybe in a message, maybe in person. You say what's bothering you, explain what you felt, ask for clarity. But instead of being met with understanding, you get coldness, maybe defensiveness, maybe silence. Maybe they tell you you're reading too much into it, that you're too sensitive, too emotional, too much. And even though a part of you knows your feelings made sense, that part goes quiet, you retreat, you second-guess yourself. You start replaying every word, every detail, every look. And then, to make the discomfort stop, you reach for the most disarming sentence you know: "I'm overreacting, it's my fault." You say it to protect the relationship, to lower the temperature, to get things back to normal. You offer up the apology before they even ask for it, not because you fully believe you were wrong, but because peace feels safer than truth. And so you give them permission to dismiss you. You give yourself the role of the irrational one, and in doing that, you betray the part of you that was trying to speak. This white lie doesn't sound aggressive or loud, it sounds like humility, like emotional maturity, like taking responsibility, but it's not real accountability, it's self-erasure disguised as self-awareness. You use it when the risk of being seen as difficult is scarier than the pain of being unheard. When you've been taught, consciously or not, that your emotions are problems that need to be fixed, not signals that need to be honored. Maybe you grew up with people who shut you down. Maybe past partners told you that your sadness was manipulative, your anger irrational, your boundaries dramatic. So now, when you feel something deeply, the first thing you do is doubt it. You override your own system. You label it as malfunction. And over time, this becomes your emotional reflex, to assume that any conflict is your fault, to absorb the discomfort so others don't have to be the reasonable one, the peacemaker, the one who says sorry just to make the tension go away. But here's what you lose in the process: your voice, your clarity, your right to be affected by things, because not every strong feeling is an overreaction. Not every miscommunication is your burden to carry alone. Not every uncomfortable moment is a sign that you're the problem. Sometimes you feel things because they're real, because something was off, because someone did cross a line even if they didn't mean to. And when you rush to blame yourself, you create a pattern where your needs always get buried under the desire to stay agreeable. You start to disappear in the name of keeping the peace. And then one day, you realize that no one knows what actually hurts you because you've spent years pretending nothing ever did. This lie is appealing because it keeps things calm, but calm isn't the same as healthy, and quiet isn't the same as understood. You deserve to have your emotions taken seriously, not just by others, but by yourself. That means listening to your discomfort instead of silencing it. That means pausing before you default to "it's me." That means asking, gently but honestly, if what you're feeling might actually make sense. So the next time you hear yourself say, "I'm probably just overreacting," stop and ask, are you really owning a mistake? Or are you just afraid to believe that your reaction was allowed to exist? You see the patterns even if you don't name them. The forgotten promises, the apologies that sound too familiar, the same arguments looping back around like a bad song on repeat. You feel the disappointment building, the tension under the surface, the small withdrawals of trust, but instead of walking away, you tell yourself something softer. You tell yourself they'll change. You hold on to their potential like it's a part of who they are. You replay the moments where they were kind, when they tried, when they opened up, and you use those memories as evidence that change is already happening. You explain away the setbacks. You forgive the slips. You give them time and space and second chances and quiet grace they may not even realize they're receiving. This white lie isn't loud. It doesn't scream for attention. It lives in the pauses between letdowns, in the silence between reality and what you wish it could be. Don't say it to others, not always. You might even act detached when you talk about them. But inside, this hope is what keeps you tethered not to the present, but to the future version of them you believe might still arrive. You use this lie to protect your investment. You've poured energy, love, patience into someone who hasn't fully met you where you are, and letting go would mean admitting that all of that effort may not be returned, that the version of them you built in your mind might never come to life. And that's painful, that's grief. So instead you wait, you believe, you rationalize, you tell yourself they need more time, more stability, more understanding. And maybe they do, maybe they're trying, but the question isn't whether change is possible. Of course it is. People evolve every day. The real question is, are they choosing to change? Are they showing up not just with words, but with actions, with discomfort, with accountability? Because change doesn't come gently, it disrupts. It demands effort, self-confrontation, humility. It's not something you wait for, it's something they have to fight for. And if they're not fighting, if they're just coasting while you carry the hope for both of you, then it's not growth, it's fantasy. You use this lie because it's easier than admitting what's already in front of you, that who they are right now may not be enough for what you need, that you've built a bridge from your side and they're still standing where they started. That loving someone doesn't always mean they'll rise to meet you. Sometimes it just means you have more to give than they're willing to reach for. The longer you believe this lie, the deeper the hurt becomes. Not because they meant to harm you, but because every time they don't change, you take it personally. You wonder what more you could have done. You question your timing, your tone, your patience. You carry their delay as your responsibility, but their healing is not yours to manage. Their readiness is not your project. You can love someone and still let them go. You can hope for their growth and still accept that it may happen far away from you or never at all. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "They'll change," pause and ask, are you holding on to a person or just a possibility that's keeping you from choosing yourself? You say it to your reflection after another night of silence, another promise broken, another slow erosion of what you once called love. You say it after a job drains you day after day, when you're doing everything right and still being overlooked. You say it when a friend ghosts you, when a parent disappoints you again, when life hands you something hollow and tells you to be grateful. You whisper it under your breath or type it in a message you'll never send. I deserve better. And maybe it's true. Maybe you do deserve better. Maybe you've been patient, kind, loyal. Maybe you've shown up again and again in places that didn't see you, or value you, or return even half of what you gave. But the problem with this sentence, this white lie, is that it often arrives not as a declaration of truth, but as a shield against truth. It becomes a way to blame the world without facing your own patterns. A way to feel powerful when deep down you feel powerless. You say, I deserve better, to end the thought before it gets uncomfortable. Before you have to ask the harder questions. If I know I deserve more, why do I keep accepting less? Why do I stay, wait, beg, justify? Why do I shrink myself around people who make me small? You use this lie not just to elevate yourself, but to avoid responsibility for your own boundaries. It gives you a story in which you are the mistreated hero and the world is the failing villain. And yes, sometimes the world does fail you. People fail you, systems fail you, and you are allowed to feel that. But if "I deserve better" is always where your story ends, then it never becomes your choice. It just becomes your lament, your excuse, your loop. Because if you truly believed that you deserve better, your actions would start to reflect it. You'd stop chasing people who breadcrumb you. You'd walk away the first time your dignity was treated like an inconvenience. You'd stop proving your worth to people who treat it like a discount. But that kind of self-belief takes work. It takes uncomfortable honesty. It takes looking at the ways you participate in your own hurt. The truth is, sometimes you say, "I deserve better," not to claim something greater, but to avoid admitting that you've been settling, that you've known it all along, that you're afraid of what happens if you really start asking for more. Because asking means risking rejection. Asking means being alone. Asking means giving up the scraps in your hand for the hope of something more whole. That's terrifying, so you stay, you vent, you cope. You say the sentence like a protest, but nothing changes. You wait for the world to agree, but the world won't, not until you do. "I deserve better" can be a beginning, but only if it's followed by action, by boundaries, by saying no, by not texting back, by leaving the table when love is no longer being served, even if your legs shake on the way out. It means you stop trying to be the exception for people who treat others poorly. It means you stop hoping someone will see your value and start being the one who refuses to be unseen. So the next time you say, "I deserve better," ask, "Is this my truth, or just a line I use to comfort myself while staying exactly where I am?" Because deserving more is not just something you say. It's something you do even when it's hard, especially then. You don't get the reply you hoped for. They back off after getting close. They seem interested at first, but then hesitate, disappear, shift into distance. And as you sit there wondering what changed, trying to make sense of the silence, a thought slips in that feels both soothing and powerful. "They're intimidated by me." You tell yourself they couldn't handle your confidence, your intelligence, your ambition, that you were too much for them, too deep, too real, too intense. You say it to friends like a casual theory, but inside it becomes a strategy for protecting your self-worth. Because if they're intimidated, then the rejection isn't really rejection. It's not that they didn't want you, it's that they weren't capable of wanting someone like you. This white lie is appealing because it reframes absence as admiration. It turns being overlooked into being too powerful to be touched. You're not abandoned, you're simply too evolved. You use it when you feel small but don't want to admit it. When someone's coldness triggers something insecure in you and you don't know how to sit with it. You reach for this sentence like armor, sharp, shiny, untouchable, because the alternative is harder to hold. What if they just didn't like you that much? What if the connection you imagined was only yours? What if they could handle you, they just didn't want to? That's the ache you're avoiding. That's what this lie helps you cover up. You use it to escape the sting of not being chosen, of being visible and still not seen. Because you've worked hard to build this version of yourself, strong, honest, expressive, and the thought that someone could look at all of that and walk away anyway feels unbearable. So instead of feeling that vulnerability, you rewrite the story. They saw your light and couldn't stand it. But here's the danger: when you say this too often, you start turning away from any real feedback. You start treating every mismatch like a weakness in others. You stop asking yourself whether your communication was open, whether your energy was balanced, whether your expectations were clear. You use the label of intimidating to avoid self-reflection, to protect your pride at the cost of connection. You start confusing self-defense with self-respect. Because yes, sometimes people are intimidated by authenticity. Sometimes your depth does unsettle people who only swim in the shallow end. But not every time, and when it becomes your default explanation, it starts to isolate you. It turns you into someone who doesn't even try to connect anymore. Because why bother if everyone's just going to shrink away from your brilliance? Why open up if people are always going to get scared and run? You begin to live like someone too big for the room, without ever asking if you maybe just stopped learning how to fit beside someone instead of above them. The lie starts to bleed into how you see the world. You become defensive, cynical, untouchable. And slowly, the very thing you feared, being alone, being misunderstood, becomes your reality. Not because they couldn't handle you, but because you decided they never could. So the next time you hear yourself say, "They were probably intimidated by me," pause and ask, is that really what happened? Or is that just your pride rescuing you from the sadness of not being chosen? Because the only thing more powerful than being too much is being honest enough to say, maybe I wasn't what they wanted, and maybe that's okay. They saw your message and didn't reply. They had free time but didn't call. They liked your post but didn't ask how you're doing. And instead of asking them directly or expressing your confusion, you say it to yourself like a final verdict. If they wanted to, they would. You let it drop like a gavel in your head, a sentence that closes the case and ends the doubt. You tell yourself that people make time for what matters, that when someone cares, they show up without needing reminders. You repeat the phrase as if it's proof of your logic, your standards, your maturity, but inside, you're still wondering if that's the whole truth. Because while if they wanted to, they would sound strong, it's often just a white lie you tell to manage disappointment without having to feel the fullness of it. It's a way to harden your edges quickly, before the sadness gets in. It lets you believe that you weren't left behind because you were unworthy, but because they simply chose not to care. And if that's the case, then fine. Case closed, emotionally detached, but you know it's rarely that simple. People don't always act on what they want. Sometimes they want to reach out, but they're afraid. Sometimes they care, but they're avoidant, distracted, overwhelmed, emotionally unavailable, or just incapable of showing up in the way you need. Human behavior isn't clean. Feelings don't always translate into action. And people's silence doesn't always mean they don't care. Sometimes it means they don't know how. But if you let yourself believe that, you'd have to face an even harder question. Why do you keep attaching yourself to people who don't know how to love you out loud? That's the truth beneath this lie. You use it to create emotional closure in situations that still feel open. You say it to keep yourself from waiting by the phone, from checking the message thread, from sending another text they won't answer. You turn their inaction into your boundary, and in many ways it works. It gives you distance. It keeps your dignity intact. It stops you from begging for scraps of attention. But over time, it also trains you to give up quickly. It teaches you that the only proof of care is immediate, obvious effort, and anything less means nothing. You start treating people's silence as rejection, even if it's just confusion. You stop asking for clarification. You stop giving grace. And most dangerously, you stop expressing your own needs. Because this sentence, if they wanted to, they would, also works in reverse. If you wanted to know, you'd de-ask. If you wanted clarity, you'd speak up. If you wanted real connection, you'd risk being misunderstood. But instead, you choose the cleaner story, the one where you're always on higher ground, the one where you walk away quickly because you know your worth. But knowing your worth isn't the same as avoiding emotional vulnerability. Walking away isn't always strength. Sometimes it's just fear dressed up as confidence. Because if they might care and you don't ask, then you get to stay angry instead of heartbroken. You get to stay in control instead of raw, but control doesn't heal. It just freezes the pain in place. The truth is, sometimes they would if they could. Sometimes they're not there yet. Sometimes they never will be. And yes, you deserve someone who shows up without being reminded. But you also deserve to be honest with yourself about what hurts, about what you wanted, about what you're afraid to ask. So the next time you say, if they wanted to, they would, pause and ask, are you protecting your self-respect, or just shielding your heart from the risk that maybe they wanted to and still did? And maybe that's what hurts the most. The message comes through and your chest tightens. Maybe someone calls you out, asks you to explain, invites you into a hard conversation. Maybe they express confusion, disappointment, a need you weren't prepared to meet. And almost instantly the sentence appears in your head like a shield. I don't have time for this. You say it with a tone that's half exhausted, half dismissive. You say it to end the conversation before it begins. You say it to avoid the weight of what's being asked of you. And on the surface, it sounds like a boundary. You're busy, you have your priorities, you're managing stress, protecting your peace. But underneath, this is one of the most polished white lies you tell yourself, not because you literally don't have time, but because you don't have the emotional space to deal with it. And instead of admitting that you feel overwhelmed, triggered, exposed, guilty, or just unprepared, you reach for time as an excuse. You weaponize it to avoid intimacy. You use it to exit moments that make you feel vulnerable. Because time is a convenient villain, you can always blame your calendar. You can always say you're focused, in motion, unavailable. No one questions it. No one pushes back. And best of all, it doesn't sound like a rejection, it sounds like discipline. But here's the truth. When you say, I don't have time for this, you're not just avoiding a conversation, you're avoiding a part of yourself that might not want to be seen. The part that doesn't want to be confronted, the part that's uncomfortable being called out, the part that struggles with conflict or discomfort or closeness. And slowly this sentence becomes your go-to exit. Any situation that requires vulnerability, accountability, softness, you label it as drama or unnecessary or too much. You walk away from people who need more than you're ready to give, and instead of saying, I'm scared, you say, I'm busy. Instead of saying, I don't know how to deal with this, you say, this isn't worth my time. And eventually you build an identity around avoidance. You start to believe that anyone who challenges you is toxic, that anyone who brings up pain is draining, that anyone who has needs is needy. You turn emotional distance into a value system, but what you're really doing is abandoning the version of yourself that could have grown in those conversations, that could have learned how to stay. That could have opened up, even a little, even if it was hard. Because the truth is, some of the most important moments in your life will look like inconvenient conversations. Some of the most meaningful connections will start with discomfort. And the thing you keep pushing away because you don't have time, that might be the thing that actually changes you, or heals you, or shows you something about yourself you've never seen before. But if you always choose efficiency over emotion, you miss it. You become the person who's always unavailable when it matters most. And over time, people stop reaching out. They stop trying, because they know your answer before they ask. So the next time you hear yourself say, I don't have time for this. Stop and ask, is that really true? Or are you just afraid of where this might take you if you stayed long enough to find out? You sit with someone who sees you clearly, maybe a friend, maybe someone trying to love you, and they offer warmth, curiosity, patience. They ask questions you're not used to hearing, they wait for answers you're not used to giving. And instead of letting yourself lean in, you pull back, you smile sadly, you shrug. You say it like a warning, like a disclaimer before the conversation can go any deeper. I'm too damaged. You don't raise your voice, you don't cry. You just say it with that familiar heaviness in your chest, like this truth is already set in stone. You say it to explain your distance, your fear, your silence, your tendency to disappear when things start to feel real. You say it so they don't get their hopes up, so they know not to expect the best of you, so they understand that what looks like coldness is really just protection. And in the moment, it feels like honesty. It feels like maturity. You think you're doing them a favor by setting expectations low, by managing the risk of disappointment. But here's the thing, I'm too damaged isn't honesty, it's resignation. It's a white lie dressed as self-awareness, because damage implies finality. It implies that what hurt you in the past has permanently defined you, that the worst thing that ever happened to you now owns the rest of your story. And that's not truth, that's surrender. You tell yourself this lie to avoid the risk of opening up again. You use it as a shield to keep people at a distance, to keep connection from getting too close. Because connection means vulnerability. It means being seen, being chosen, being responsible for someone's trust. And if you're damaged, if you're broken, if you're already ruined, then you don't have to carry that weight. You don't have to be soft. You don't have to show up. You can stay on the edges of things and call it protection. You can stay distant and call it strength. But the truth is, no one escapes this life without scars. We all carry stories that hurt. And being hurt doesn't make you unlovable. It doesn't make you incapable. It doesn't make you destined to hurt others just because you were hurt first. What it does mean is that you're human, that there are wounds still tender, that some parts of you are still learning how to trust again. And those parts don't need to be labeled damaged, they need to be understood. Because the moment you call yourself damaged, you stop trying, you stop growing, you stop believing that the next chapter can be different from the last. You live like someone who's already been decided when in reality you're still writing the story. And yes, healing is slow. Yes, sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but you're not a warning label, you're not a caution sign, you're not a lost cause. You are allowed to be in process. You are allowed to be unsure, unfinished, messy. And still worthy of closeness, still capable of love, still able to build something new. So the next time you hear yourself say, I'm too damaged, pause and ask, is that really who you are, or is it just the name you've given yourself to make sure no one gets close enough to prove you wrong? You tell yourself it's behind you, you've forgiven them or forgotten them or stopped caring completely. You don't bring it up anymore, you don't cry when their name comes up. You've moved on with your life, or at least you look like you have. And whenever the memory tries to rise again, whenever the ache returns for a few seconds in the quiet of your day, you smother it with a sentence you've learned to say without thinking, I've let it go. You say it like a badge of strength, like proof that you're healed. Like you've reached some higher ground where the past no longer touches you, but deep down you know there's something unfinished. A sharp edge that hasn't been filed down, a part of you that still clenches when you hear that voice, see that face, remember that moment. This is one of the most common white lies in emotional life. We say it not because it's true, but because we need it to be true. Because the alternative, that we're still hurt, still angry, still carrying it, feels weak, or embarrassing, or exhausting. So we say we've let go, we declare closure long before it has arrived. And once we've said it enough, we stop giving ourselves permission to feel anything else. We don't talk about the betrayal anymore. We don't name the heartbreak. We don't ask for clarity, for apology, for anything, because to do so would unravel the narrative we've built. You tell yourself you've let it go because you think healing means silence, because you think peace looks like pretending you were never touched. But real peace doesn't come from pretending. It comes from moving through the mess, from sitting with the anger until it burns clean, from acknowledging the parts of you that still want to scream or ask why or be held. Letting go is not an event. It's not a line you cross. It's a process and not a linear one. It's revisiting the memory 100 times and finding that slowly it has less power. It's being reminded of the pain and realizing it doesn't control your choices anymore. It's allowing the grief to finish what it started. But when you say, I've let it go too early, you cut the grief short. You move on without actually moving through. You bury things alive and then wonder why they come back in dreams, in arguments, in sudden tightness in your chest. You don't release the weight, you just get better at carrying it without looking like you're struggling. And the longer you tell the lie, the harder it becomes to admit what's still there. Because now people expect you to be over it. You expect yourself to be over it, and anything else feels like failure. But it's not failure to feel. It's not weakness to still care, to still hurt, to still wish things had ended differently. It's honest, it's human. And honesty is where healing begins. Letting go doesn't mean you don't remember. It means you remember and choose to stop trying to fix what's already gone. It means you stop defining your present by what happened back then. But before you can truly let go, you have to admit that you haven't yet. And that takes courage, that takes softness, that takes time. So the next time you say, "I've let it go," pause and ask, have you really released it? Or are you just afraid of what might still be waiting underneath if you let yourself feel it fully one last time? You tell yourself this when you're trying to sound mature, when you're trying to seem emotionally detached, when you've been hurt but don't want to admit it. They don't owe me anything. It sounds reasonable, enlightened even. A line someone strong might say. You tell yourself they're free to do what they want. You tell yourself expectations are the root of suffering. You tell yourself you're not entitled to their presence, their kindness, their decency. And in one sense, that's true. But when you repeat it over and over, what you're really doing is denying the emotional contract that forms between people who care about each other. Because people do owe each other things, not money, not favors, but basic emotional reciprocity. If someone has benefited from your loyalty, your time, your vulnerability, your help, if someone has been loved by you, seen by you, trusted by you, then no, they don't owe you their life, but they do owe you clarity, respect, a minimal effort to acknowledge what passed between you. Saying they don't owe me anything becomes a lie when it's used to suppress justified hurt. You use this phrase to mask betrayal. Someone ghosted you. Someone pulled away the moment things got complicated. Someone leaned on your presence when they needed it and then evaporated the second they felt strong again. But instead of calling it abandonment, you call it freedom. You rewrite the story to protect their image, or worse, to protect your pride. You don't want to look needy. You don't want to admit that a part of you still waits for something, so you say they don't owe you anything. And over time, this becomes a mindset. You start to apply it everywhere: when friends flake, when lovers disappear, when family crosses lines. You say it's fine, they don't owe me anything, as if that makes you wise or evolved. But deep down, it leaves you unaccounted for, unheard. You strip yourself of the right to hold anyone to a standard. You start to believe that disappointment is just part of the deal. You convince yourself that being let down is normal, even deserved. This lie becomes a coping mechanism. It's how you stay composed. It's how you avoid confrontation. It's how you erase your own needs, because asking for accountability is vulnerable. It risks rejection. It risks looking like you're taking things too personally. So instead, you adopt a posture of non-attachment. But it's not real non-attachment. It's emotional suppression dressed up as philosophical wisdom. And it has a cost. When you repeatedly deny that people owe you something, not everything, just something human and basic, you begin to feel replaceable, disposable. You start to think that your value is purely in what you give, not in what is honored in return. You stop setting boundaries. You stop expecting anything. You become someone who accepts crumbs and calls it growth. But accountability is not entitlement. You are not entitled to someone's love, but you are allowed to feel hurt if someone used you. You are allowed to say, "That wasn't fair." You are allowed to want closure, to want truth, to want mutual respect. Relationships are not transactions, but they are mirrors. If someone benefits from your kindness and then disappears, it is not ungrateful to want acknowledgement. If someone receives your loyalty and then ignores your pain, it is not petty to feel let down. So next time you say, "They don't owe me anything," pause. Ask yourself if you really believe that, or if you're using it to make yourself easier to ignore. Ask yourself if you're saying it to free them or to trap yourself in silence. And remember, maturity doesn't mean suppressing your feelings. It means expressing them clearly and still choosing what kind of person you want to be. Because you do have a right to expect something from those who have held your heart, even if it's just honesty. Even if it's just goodbye. You say this like it's a strength, a badge of honor, proof that you've outgrown disappointment. "I don't expect anything from anyone." You claim it like a philosophy, as if expecting nothing is the key to peace. But more often than not, it's a shield. It's the lie you tell yourself when you've been let down so many times that wanting something now feels foolish. You lower your expectations not out of wisdom, but out of pain, and you call it detachment to avoid calling it fear. At some point, you decided that hoping too much hurt too much. You gave more than you got. You stayed longer than you should have. You waited for words that never came, gestures that were always just out of reach. And instead of staying in that place of longing, you turned cold. You called it acceptance. You said you didn't expect anything anymore, but deep down you still do. You still want to be chosen, seen, remembered, valued. You still feel it when someone forgets to ask how you are. When they reply late, when they show up for others but not for you. This lie lets you avoid confrontation. If you don't expect anything, then you can't be disappointed. If you don't want anything, then no one can fail you. It gives you an exit strategy from emotional accountability, both theirs and your own. You don't have to ask for better, or explain why something hurts, or negotiate what you deserve. You just pretend you didn't want anything to begin with. But expectation is not weakness. Expecting decency, care, effort, that's not entitlement, that's emotional health. When you erase all expectations, you're not being strong, you're becoming invisible. You stop articulating your needs, you stop hoping, you stop being known. People around you don't know what matters to you because you stopped saying it. You stopped expecting, so they stopped trying. This can lead to quiet loneliness. You're surrounded by people, but none of them know what you want because you won't let them. You avoid asking for anything directly. You downplay your desires. You pretend you're just happy to be included, even when you feel like an afterthought. And when someone does something thoughtless, you forgive it before they even apologize because, after all, you weren't expecting anything. But resentment doesn't care about what you said out loud. It grows anyway. You start feeling bitter, detached, cynical. You tell yourself you're above needing others, but in truth, you're exhausted from being the one who always expects nothing and gives everything. You think it makes you selfless, but really, it just makes you silently starved. So ask yourself, do you really expect nothing, or have you just convinced yourself it's safer that way? Are you protecting peace or avoiding risk? Because real connection requires expectation. It requires hope. It requires courage to say, this is what I need, and accept the risk that someone might not meet you there. You don't have to demand perfection, but you're allowed to want reciprocity. You're allowed to expect kindness, attention, consistency. You're allowed to want the kind of love that remembers small things and shows up without being begged. You're allowed to hope. And yes, that makes you vulnerable, but it also makes you human. Because expecting nothing is not a sign of strength, it's a sign of someone who once expected too much and got tired of being let down. And while that weariness is real, it's not the end of the story. You can learn to expect again, not blindly, not foolishly, but wisely. You can say, I deserve care, and I won't pretend otherwise just to seem strong. And when someone meets you with what you hoped for, not because you demanded it, but because they care, you'll remember that expectation isn't the enemy. The real enemy is pretending you don't have a heart just because it's been bruised before. You say it like a declaration, like a truth you've earned through struggle. I'm not looking for validation, as if validation is beneath you, as if it's some shallow craving for attention that you've risen above. You say it to sound secure, to sound untouchable, but the very act of saying it is often a giveaway, a sign that you are looking for something. Not applause, not likes, but acknowledgement, resonance. A signal that you exist, that you matter, that what you feel is real. The truth is, everyone looks for validation, even those who claim they don't. A child seeks it in a parent's eyes. A friend seeks it in someone remembering their birthday. A partner seeks it in being chosen without hesitation. You seek it when you check your phone after a message you sent, when you notice who looked at your story, when you replay a conversation hoping they understood what you meant. You seek it in subtle ways, not because you're weak, but because you're human. This white lie works like a defense mechanism. Maybe someone told you you're too sensitive, or that you care too much what others think. Maybe you learned to hide your longing for validation by labeling it as a flaw, so you flipped the narrative. You made yourself into someone who doesn't need anyone's approval. You say things like, I know my worth, or I validate myself. And while that's a powerful idea, it can also become a shield, a way to avoid admitting that you still want to be seen. The danger of this lie is that it isolates you. If you can't admit that you need validation, then you can't ask for it in healthy ways. You end up hoping others will read your silence, that they'll know what you need without you saying it, that they'll sense your unspoken pain. But people aren't mind readers, and without clear signals, they often give you less, not more, so you keep pretending that it doesn't matter even when it does. And validation doesn't have to mean ego stroking. It doesn't mean you want praise for nothing. It means wanting your emotions reflected back to you. It means wanting to be understood, to have someone say, yes, I hear you, or yes, I'd feel the same way. That's not neediness, that's emotional grounding. When people tell you you're just looking for validation, as if it's an insult, they're weaponizing one of the most natural needs we have, the need to be mirrored. When you lie and say you're not looking for validation, you also begin to deny yourself the joy of being affirmed. You reject compliments, you brush off appreciation. You tell yourself it's all external noise, that the only voice that matters is your own. But that inner voice was formed by others. The way you talk to yourself is shaped by how others once talked to you, or didn't, and it's okay to want to reshape that narrative with help. So maybe instead of saying, I'm not looking for validation, you could say, I'm trying to find balance between self-trust and external feedback, between knowing your value and letting others reflect it back to you, between strength and softness. You don't need everyone to understand you, but you're allowed to want someone to. And when you stop lying to yourself about that need, something surprising happens. You start asking for what you need without shame. You start letting compliments land. You start feeling gratitude when someone sees you instead of guilt. You stop equating vulnerability with weakness, and you remember that being human means needing connection, not pretending to live in an emotional vacuum. Because you were never meant to feel things in isolation. You were meant to echo and be echoed, and that's not a flaw, that's a design. You say it quickly, almost laughing. It's not that serious. When someone notices the tension in your shoulders, when they ask if something's wrong, when you're caught staring too long at nothing, you minimize it, you wave it away. You downplay the ache that's been living quietly in your chest, because if you admitted how serious it felt, even just for a second, you might fall apart. So you make it small. You turn the volume down. You tell yourself it's not worth making a scene. This is one of the most dangerous white lies because it slowly teaches you to distrust your own emotional weight. It tells you that your reactions are exaggerated, that your feelings are dramatic, that your wounds should be silent. You tell yourself it's not that serious because you're afraid of what might happen if you said it is. You're afraid of being seen as overreacting, or worse, as weak. So you train yourself to underreact. But pain doesn't get smaller when you dismiss it. It grows quieter, it burrows deeper, it waits. And when you keep saying it's not that serious, the people around you believe you. They stop asking, they stop offering support, they stop noticing, because you told them not to, you told them everything was fine, you told them not to worry. And when you're finally overwhelmed, when the weight becomes too much, you wonder why no one was there for you, but they were, you just told them not to be. This lie also protects others more than it protects you. Sometimes you say it's not that serious because you're trying to make them comfortable. You don't want them to feel guilty or responsible or burdened, so you carry it alone. You mask your heartbreak with sarcasm. You package your anxiety as jokes. You disguise your disappointment as indifference. But your nervous system knows, your body knows, your sleep, your appetite, your focus, they all know. Eventually, the consequences show up. You stop trusting your instincts. You start questioning whether your boundaries matter. You start letting things slide that shouldn't. People cross lines and you pretend it's fine. You accept disrespect and reframe it as resilience. You let important things rot in silence because naming them feels like too much trouble, all because you told yourself and everyone else that it's not that serious. But what if it is serious? What if the hurt is valid? What if your emotions are proportionate to the experience? What if the story you're telling yourself is just a way to avoid confrontation, or protect your pride, or avoid being the dramatic one? There's strength in saying, "This matters to me." There's clarity in admitting, "I'm affected by this." That doesn't make you weak, it makes you real. You're allowed to feel things deeply. You're allowed to react strongly to things that violate your peace. You're allowed to have standards, and when those standards are not met, you're allowed to say so. Because saying it's not that serious is a way to disappear from your own story. And if you keep disappearing long enough, you forget where you ended and where the pretending began. So next time you feel the urge to minimize, to make yourself smaller, to silence your own heartbeat, try saying nothing. Just let the feeling sit. Let it be big. Let it be real. And maybe, just maybe, let someone else see it too. You say it after being left out, overlooked, forgotten. After the message doesn't come, the apology doesn't arrive, or the effort isn't returned. You let out a half shrug and tell yourself, or maybe someone else, "I never cared that much anyway." It sounds casual, light, dismissive, like you were never truly invested in the first place. But if that were true, you wouldn't be saying it. If that were true, you wouldn't need the sentence at all. This is one of the most common white lies people use to bury disappointment. You say you didn't care to avoid admitting just how much you did. Because to care and not be cared for in return feels humiliating. You gave time, attention, maybe even love, and what you got back didn't match. So now you rewrite the story. You pretend your feelings were shallow, temporary, insignificant. You act like the relationship, the job, the friendship, the opportunity didn't mean that much, but your body knows the truth. Your habits gave it away. The way you waited, the way you hoped, the way your chest tightened every time you remembered. This lie gives you a sense of control. If you never cared, then no one can hurt you. If you never cared, then you didn't lose anything. But the pain you're trying to skip is still there. It just moves inward where it becomes cynicism, bitterness, and distance. When you repeat this lie often enough, you start preemptively detaching from things. You stop investing fully. You stop trying deeply. You stop letting yourself care, not because you don't want to, but because you're terrified of what will happen if you do. And over time, that changes you. You become colder, numb, detached. You convince yourself that nothing truly moves you anymore. But underneath, there's still a version of you who used to care too much, who waited, who gave more than was safe. That version didn't die, you just silenced it. You taught yourself that expressing care makes you weak, so you buried it under sarcasm and indifference. But there's nothing embarrassing about caring. There's nothing shameful about wanting something to matter. The lie doesn't protect you from pain, it just turns that pain into something solitary, something secret, and that's even lonelier. So maybe you did care, maybe you cared more than they'll ever know. That doesn't make you naive or foolish. It means you were present. It means you felt something real. And no matter how the story ended, the fact that you cared doesn't make you pathetic. It makes you human. They say something careless, they interrupt you, they forget something important, they cross a line they should have known not to, and you feel it instantly, that internal flinch, the small emotional wound forming. But when they look at you and ask, "Are you mad?" you don't pause, you just smile, shake your head and say, "No, I'm not mad." And maybe you even believe it in that moment, because what's the point? Bringing it up feels exhausting. Getting into it feels dramatic, so you skip it, you let it go. You lie. You're not shouting, you're not slamming doors, so you convince yourself it's not anger. But anger doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's quiet, simmering, waiting. Sometimes it hides under politeness, under patience, under practiced neutrality. You keep saying, "I'm not mad," until the resentment becomes so familiar you stop noticing how much it's coloring your behavior. You become passive-aggressive. You distance yourself. You withdraw affection. You start keeping score. This white lie doesn't just protect the other person from discomfort, it protects you from vulnerability. Because being mad means you cared. It means something mattered enough to affect you. And if you express it, you risk being told you're overreacting, being gaslit, or dismissed. So instead, you choose peace on the surface and chaos underneath. But suppressed anger doesn't go away, it builds, it distorts. It comes out sideways in sarcastic comments, cold silences, or tension you can't explain. And then you start questioning yourself. Why am I like this? Why does everything annoy me? You don't realize that the original anger never got released, it just got buried. And sometimes you lie and say you're not mad because you don't think your anger is valid. You compare your pain to others and decide it's not big enough to express. You think they didn't mean it, or it's not a big deal. So you gaslight yourself. You invalidate your own experience before anyone else can. But anger isn't the enemy. Unexpressed anger is. Unacknowledged anger turns you into someone who keeps apologizing for having boundaries, someone who can't say no without guilt, someone who tolerates things that eat them alive because it's easier. So what if next time you said, "Yes, I am a little mad," not with rage, not with blame, just with honesty? What if you let that anger speak before it turns into something worse? What if anger could be a signpost instead of a secret, a moment of truth instead of a mask? You're allowed to be mad, you're allowed to feel it, name it, express it, and doing so doesn't make you difficult, it makes you real. You say it like it's a final step, like you're standing at the last door of a story you've been trying to end for too long. "I just want closure." It sounds clean, mature, reasonable, as if you're not asking for more, just clarity, just understanding, just a final sentence so you can move on. But the truth is, this is one of the most misleading white lies people tell themselves in the aftermath of disappointment. Because closure, in the way you imagine it, almost never comes. When you say you want closure, what you usually want is something else. You want the other person to understand how much they hurt you. You want them to admit they were wrong. You want them to feel the weight of what they did. You want them to apologize in the exact way you rehearsed in your mind. You want the story to make sense. You want the pain to be witnessed. But instead of saying all that, because it feels too raw, too messy, you say, "I just want closure." The lie gives you the illusion that you're asking for something neutral, that you're not emotionally attached anymore, that you're just finishing unfinished business. But if you were truly detached, you wouldn't need the door to be closed by someone else's hand. You'd walk away, quietly, fully. You wouldn't need to hear their explanation. You wouldn't need to read their last message. You wouldn't need to meet for one more coffee just to talk. This white lie keeps you tethered. It makes you wait for something that might never come. It gives you permission to keep reaching out, to keep thinking about them, to keep holding on to the hope that they'll finally get it. But people rarely give you the closure you imagine. Sometimes they ghost, sometimes they lie, sometimes they twist the truth to make themselves feel better. Sometimes they genuinely don't understand what they did wrong and never will. And that's where this lie starts to unravel. Because if you cling to the belief that closure comes from them, you give them power over your healing. You put your peace in someone else's hands. You postpone your recovery. You rehearse conversations that will never happen. You write paragraphs you'll never send. You build an emotional bridge to someone who already walked away. And sometimes, even when they do respond, it doesn't help. They say the right words, but it doesn't feel satisfying. You still feel hollow, still confused, because closure isn't a moment, it's a process. It doesn't arrive in a sentence. It unfolds in silence, in grief, in realization. It happens when you stop needing them to validate your experience, when you stop needing them to give you permission to let go. The deeper truth is that "I just want closure" often means "I want to feel in control of how this ends." But most endings are messy. Most endings are asymmetrical. One person is still full of words, the other is already gone, and the person who walks away cleanly rarely looks back to offer clarity. They don't think about the story you're still living. They've already started writing a new one. So what if you gave yourself closure? What if you stopped waiting for their version and started telling your own? What if you said it ended and that's enough? Not because it feels good, but because it's real. Because staying stuck in the pursuit of closure is another way of refusing to move forward. You don't need their apology to heal. You don't need their explanation to know what happened. You were there, you felt it, you saw the shift, you heard what wasn't said. And maybe that's all the closure you'll ever get or need. You repeat it like a quiet prayer, after a fight, after a ghosting, after weeks of silence that used to be filled with attention and affection. You tell yourself they'll come around eventually. It gives you hope, it softens the blow, it turns waiting into something noble instead of desperate. But behind this white lie is a deep unwillingness to accept the one truth you're not ready for. Sometimes they won't. This lie keeps you in emotional limbo. You check your phone more than you admit. You replay old messages trying to find proof that they did care. You cling to small moments, a like on your photo, a late-night story view, as if they're signs of progress. You convince yourself that people just need time, that they're thinking, processing, that they'll come back once they realize what they lost, but more often than not, they don't. The idea that they'll come around is seductive because it postpones pain. It makes rejection feel temporary. It lets you delay the full grief of loss. You don't have to mourn them yet because they're not really gone, not forever, not if you just hold on. So you wait, you don't date, you don't move on, you stay loyal to the possibility of a return. But here's what happens while you wait. Life moves on without you. You pause your own healing. You measure every week by what they do or don't do. You lose time you'll never get back, not because they asked you to wait, but because you chose to. You don't realize how much of your identity starts revolving around their potential return. And the longer you wait, the more pressure builds. If they do come back, it'll have to mean something huge. Otherwise, what was all this pain for? This white lie also disguises your fear. It's not just that you want them to return, it's that you don't want to face the loneliness without them. You're afraid that if this person doesn't come back, no one else will make you feel that way again. So you romanticize the waiting, you call it loyalty, you call it faith, but deep down, you know you're stalling. And even if they do come around, what then? If someone left without explanation, ignored your boundaries, or needed absence to understand your value, do they really deserve a place in your future? Or are you just too afraid to close the door completely? The real closure isn't in their return, it's in your decision to stop waiting. To stop making space in your life for someone who isn't showing up. To choose yourself, even if it means walking away without a perfect ending. Because sometimes they don't come around, and sometimes you stop needing them too. You say it with pride, maybe even with a laugh, whenever someone asks. Me, I'm not afraid of intimacy. You talk about how open you are, how much you love deep conversations, how you're always the one ready to commit. And on the surface, it's believable. You might even believe it yourself. But this is one of the most subtle and dangerous white lies because it hides in plain sight. It disguises itself as confidence while masking the deep discomfort you feel when things get too close. You might be great at the beginning. You connect fast, overshare, open up quickly, create intense emotional bonds in record time. You make people feel seen, understood, chosen, but then something shifts. They start needing consistency. They ask for more. They mirror your intimacy back to you, and that's when it gets scary. You start pulling away. You find flaws. You nitpick. You question the timing. You blame your schedule, your mental state, the fact that you're just not ready. But underneath all that, there's a fear. What if they see the real you? What if they stay and you disappoint them? What if you stay and they chain? This lie convinces you that your patterns are just circumstantial. You don't recognize that emotional avoidance doesn't always look like silence or withdrawal. Sometimes it looks like intensity followed by sabotage. You get close enough to feel the high, then create distance to avoid the crash. You call it independence, you call it standards, but what you're really doing is protecting yourself from being fully known. Because true intimacy isn't just about sharing your best stories, it's about being vulnerable without control. It's about letting someone see you when you're not impressive, when you're messy, when you're scared. And that kind of closeness can feel unbearable if you've learned that love is conditional, if you've been punished for needing too much, if you've been abandoned after showing your real self. So you build walls and decorate them with charm. You get really good at being open in controlled doses. You make it look effortless, but you always keep an exit nearby, an unspoken boundary, an escape plan, a way to emotionally retreat if it gets too real. And every time you leave a connection that got too close, you say the same thing: it just wasn't right. Never, I was afraid. The cost of this white lie is long-term loneliness dressed up as freedom. You tell yourself you're fine on your own, that you haven't found the right person yet, that you're just protecting your peace. But deep down, you know something's missing. Not because you haven't met someone good, but but because you don't let good things stay. Admitting you're afraid of intimacy doesn't make you broken, it makes you honest. It opens the door to real connection, because intimacy doesn't start when someone else gets closer, it starts when you stop running. You wear it like a badge of honor, you say it humbly or sometimes even proudly. I always put others first. It sounds noble, generous, selfless, like you're the glue that holds everyone together. And maybe you are. Maybe you really do remember every birthday, answer every call, show up when no one else will. But beneath the surface, this white lie carries a truth many don't want to face. Putting others first all the time is often not about love, it's about fear. It's about fear of being unneeded, fear of being seen as selfish, fear that if you stop giving, people will stop loving you. You confuse self-worth with usefulness. So you keep overextending, overcommitting, overfunctioning, hoping that if you give enough, care enough, sacrifice enough, someone will finally give it back. But it rarely works that way. This pattern often begins early. Maybe you were the one who had to grow up too fast. Maybe love was something you earned, not something freely given. So you learned to anticipate everyone else's needs before your own. You learned that being low maintenance, helpful, and selfless kept you safe. And now, as an adult, you continue the cycle not because you're pure-hearted, but because you're afraid of what happens when you say no. You tell yourself you're just being kind, but kindness without boundaries isn't kindness, it's self-erasure. You say yes even when you're tired. You listen even when you're breaking. You give even when no one's asking, because staying needed feels safer than being seen. But there's a cost. You start to resent the very people you're helping. You secretly hope they'll notice how much you've done, how much you've swallowed, how little you ask for in return. You want them to say thank you, to offer help without being asked, to put you first for once. But when they don't, you don't get angry, you get quieter. You become passive. You sigh louder. You hope they read between the lines. But they never learned to. You taught them that your needs don't matter. And so you become invisible in your own life, present for everyone else, absent for yourself. You burn out slowly. You call it exhaustion. But it's not just physical. It's emotional starvation, because no one can keep pouring forever without running dry. This white lie also protects you from intimacy. As long as you're the caretaker, you don't have to receive, you don't have to be vulnerable, you don't have to ask for help and risk being let down. But real connection doesn't come from what you give, it comes from what you share. And that means sometimes letting others take care of you. You don't have to stop being kind, you don't have to stop being generous, but you do have to stop lying to yourself. You're not always putting others first because it's who you are. Sometimes you're doing it because you don't believe you're allowed to be first, but you are, you always were. You say it after the 10th time you've replayed the same moment in your head, after a friend tells you to relax, after you've crafted and then deleted 3 different versions of a message you're too afraid to send. You tell yourself, I'm overthinking this, as if that will be enough to shut your mind down, as if calling it overthinking will somehow minimize what you feel. But deep down, you know you're not overthinking, you're trying to survive confusion without clarity. This white lie is your way of silencing your intuition, of making yourself smaller so you don't look crazy, so you don't sound too much, so you don't get labeled as difficult or obsessive. You convince yourself you're exaggerating, that if something really mattered, it would be obvious, that your brain is just running wild for no reason, that the silence is that loud, that the mixed signals aren't really mixed, that you're just tired, hormonal, or bored. But what if you're not overthinking? What if you're accurately noticing a subtle shift in tone, a micro-expression, a gap between words and actions? What if your brain is trying to protect you from the same mistake you made before, loving someone who couldn't hold space for your voice? What if the thoughts circling your mind are not the problem, but the system trying to solve a problem you're pretending doesn't exist? We call it overthinking when we don't want to deal with the possibility that our instincts are right. Because if they're right, it means facing something you're not ready to face, that they're pulling away, that you're not safe in this dynamic, that you've been disrespected, that the emotional labor is one-sided. It's easier to gaslight yourself than confront the emotional cost of speaking up. You keep thinking, maybe I'm too sensitive, but what you really mean is, I've noticed something and I don't feel safe enough to say it. You say, I'm reading into things, but you already know, you just don't want to admit it without proof. And in this uncertainty, the lie helps you cope. It buys you time, it keeps you functioning, but it also keeps you stuck. You keep thinking in circles not because you enjoy suffering, but because the situation is unclear, because people do leave things unsaid, because ambiguity is a tool people use to avoid accountability. And in the absence of truth, your brain fills the gap with questions, not because you're broken, but because that's what healthy minds do when they're not given answers. The problem isn't that you think too much. The problem is that you're surrounded by situations that leave too much unsaid. You wouldn't overanalyze if people were honest, if communication was clean, if love was safe. But in the chaos, your brain becomes both protector and prisoner. So this white lie becomes a mask you wear in conversations. Don't worry, it's probably nothing. I'm just being dramatic. Ignore me, I'm overthinking. But your body knows, your chest tightens, your stomach sinks, your sleep gets lighter, your heart starts bracing, because some part of you knows this isn't just in your head. What you really need isn't to stop thinking, it's to feel safe enough to trust your thoughts, to give your anxiety a home that listens, to say, this feels off, and be taken seriously. Because overthinking is not a flaw, it's a symptom. And when you treat the symptom like the disease, you silence the part of you that's trying to keep you safe. You say it automatically, sometimes with a smile, sometimes with a hint of defensiveness. No, I'm good, I've got it, I don't need help. You say it when someone offers to carry something, when someone asks how you're doing, when someone leans in with concern. You wear it like armor, not because everything is fine, but because asking for help feels more threatening than pretending you're okay. This white lie is one of the most socially rewarded and personally punishing. People respect independence, they admire resilience. They don't question strength that looks like self-sufficiency. So you learn to carry more than you should. You do things alone, you power through, you clean up your own mess, fight your own battles, soothe your own pain. And every time someone offers help, you say no, not because you're fine, but because receiving feels dangerous. Help implies vulnerability. It means admitting there's a limit to your strength, that you're human, that you're tired, that something might be too heavy. And if you've learned that weakness leads to rejection, judgment, or pity, then you avoid it at all costs. You'd rather suffer silently than risk being seen as a burden. You tell yourself, if I can't do it alone, I don't deserve it. Or if they really loved me, they'd help without me asking. Or worse, if I need help, I'm failing. So you reject kindness and then resent feeling invisible. You push people away and then wonder why you feel alone. And maybe it started in childhood. Maybe the people who were supposed to help didn't. Maybe asking led to disappointment. Maybe you learned that no one comes. So now, as an adult, you beat them to it. You say no before they have a chance to let you down. You close the door before anyone can leave. But deep down, you want to be held. You want to be asked twice. You want someone to insist, to stay, to help without making you feel weak. And when no one does, you double down. You say, I'm just built different. I don't need anyone. But it's a lonely kind of strength, the kind that builds walls instead of bridges. The longer you keep this white lie alive, the more exhausted you become. Your emotional muscles ache, your mental energy drains, you look composed on the outside, but inside you're fraying. And the scariest part is you've gotten good at pretending, so good that even the people closest to you believe the lie. They stop offering, they stop checking in, they start believing you don't need anyone. But you do. You need rest, you need someone to say, I've got you. You need softness, support, someone to carry part of the weight, not forever, just for a while, just long enough to breathe again. The truth isn't shameful, it's human. You don't have to be drowning to ask for a life raft. You don't have to be falling apart to accept a hand. The lie says, I don't need help, but the truth is braver. I'm tired, and I don't want to do this alone anymore. You say it proudly, almost like a warning. I'm just independent. You tell people up front as if to manage expectations. As if to say, don't take it personally if I don't need you, if I don't lean on you, if I disappear when things get hard. You call it strength, self-sufficiency, personal freedom. You say it like it's a fixed part of your identity, and in some ways it is, but it's also a shield. Because you didn't become this independent by choice, you became this way because you had to. Because relying on people hasn't always gone well. Because you've learned the hard way that sometimes when you ask for help, people leave, or they resent you, or they use it against you later. So you built a life where you don't have to ask, where you do it all yourself, where no one can hurt you by not showing up because you've already decided not to need them. But deep down, this white lie starts to rot, because even the most capable person eventually needs something from someone, and when you deny that need long enough, it doesn't go away, it just gets twisted. You start craving connection but resenting dependence. You want love, but only on your terms. You want closeness, but without needing anything. You want someone to understand you fully without ever having to explain. You call it independence, but sometimes it's just avoidance. It's fear disguised as autonomy. It's control dressed up as maturity. You don't want to be seen as needy, so you deny that you have needs. You don't want to be a burden, so you carry everything alone. And slowly the people around you start believing you. They stop checking in. They stop offering. They think you're fine because that's what you've shown them. And when they don't show up the way you secretly hoped they would, you don't blame them. You blame yourself for hoping. This lie tells you that needing someone makes you weak. But the truth is, hiding your needs makes you isolated. It keeps you in a loop where your strength becomes your prison. You attract people who love your independence but not your softness, not your fear, not your moments of mess. So you keep pretending, you smile, you keep things light. You brush off your pain with jokes or silence. And when no one sees through it, you tell yourself it's better that way. But what if it's not? What if independence isn't about doing everything alone, but about knowing when to let someone in? What if strength isn't denying your needs, but expressing them without shame? What if the thing you're calling independence is just loneliness in a prettier outfit? The bravest thing you can say is, I'm just independent. It's I'm strong, but I still want to be held. Not because you can't stand on your own, but because you know no one's meant to do it forever. You say it half laughing, like a joke you've told a dozen times. I always attract the wrong people. You say it after another bad date, another one-sided friendship, another situation that left you empty. It's your go-to explanation for why things keep falling apart. It sounds harmless, self-aware even, but it's not the whole truth. It's a white lie that hides something much harder to admit, that sometimes it's not about who you attract, but what you tolerate. Because attraction is just the beginning. You can't always control who walks into your life, but you do play a role in who stays, and this lie lets you ignore that part. It turns heartbreak into fate, patterns into coincidence. It keeps you from asking the harder questions. Why do I keep letting the same type of person in? Why do I stay when things feel off? Why do I confuse intensity with connection, inconsistency with mystery, coldness with emotional depth? You blame your magnetism, but often the real issue is your boundaries, or lack of them. Maybe you've been trained to see red flags as challenges. Maybe you've been told that love should hurt a little. Maybe you believe that chaos means passion, that distance means depth, that coldness means strength. So when someone comes along who mirrors your past wounds, you don't run, you lean in. You try to fix them. You try to prove you're worthy. You make excuses. You call it chemistry, when really, it's your nervous system mistaking familiarity for safety. This lie also lets you avoid growth. If it's always about them, you never have to look at what you need to change. You never have to examine the subconscious beliefs you carry about love, worth, or identity. You just keep repeating the cycle and calling it bad luck. But it's not luck, it's a pattern, and until you name it, you're stuck in it. There's also a hidden ego in this lie. Saying I attract the wrong people implies that you are right, pure, good, healthy, and that everyone else is flawed. But relationships are never that clean. Sometimes the people you call wrong are just mirrors. They reflect back your own unhealed parts, your fear of abandonment, your need to feel needed, your discomfort with calm, stable love. And when someone healthy shows up, it feels boring, off, unsafe. So you push them away and then complain that there are no good people left. This doesn't mean you're to blame for every hurt you felt, but you're not powerless either. You're not cursed. You're not a victim of fate. You're just reenacting a pattern you haven't questioned yet. The truth is, you deserve better than the chaos you've normalized, but you won't find it until you stop calling dysfunction a magnet, until you stop romanticizing your own trauma loop, until you stop laughing when you say, I always attract the wrong people, and start asking why you keep making space for them to stay. Because the right people do show up, but they often arrive quietly, patiently, without drama, and that's exactly why you overlook them. You don't need to change who you attract. You need to change what you're drawn to. You say it after a painful ending, after the silence settles in, after you've cried all the tears you promised yourself you wouldn't. It's better this way. It's the sentence you whisper to friends when they ask how you're holding up, the phrase you rehearse in your head to soften the loss. You repeat it over and over, hoping it will stick, hoping if you say it enough, you might start to believe it. Because the truth is harder, it didn't feel better. It felt like giving up. Like losing a part of yourself you weren't ready to let go. This white lie doesn't come from malice or denial, it comes from survival. It's your brain's way of finding control in a situation that left you powerless. Because if you can frame the ending as a choice, as something logical and clean, then maybe you can make sense of the pain. Maybe you don't have to feel abandoned or rejected or betrayed, just rational, like you chose this, like you wanted it to end. You say it to protect your pride, to hold yourself together in front of others, to avoid the questions that dig too deep. It's better this way becomes your armor, a tidy story to cover a messy truth. But the grief doesn't listen. It seeps through anyway in the quiet moments, in the middle of the night, in the song that suddenly makes your chest tighten, in the grocery store when you reach for something they used to love. You tell yourself this lie because admitting the truth feels unbearable, that maybe they left without really explaining, that maybe you never got closure, that maybe you still love them, or worse, you love the version of them that never actually existed, that maybe your expectations weren't too high, that maybe your needs were reasonable and they simply didn't meet them. You say it's better this way to avoid facing the ache of what if. What if things had been different? What if they'd fought harder? What if you'd been more honest? What if timing hadn't been so cruel? But the problem with what if is that it has no end. It's a trap disguised as reflection. And eventually, the only way to move forward is to kill the illusion, even if it means breaking your own heart. The lie is a stepping stone, a necessary phase. Sometimes it helps you breathe when the truth is too sharp, but if you stay there too long, it becomes a cage. You stop processing the grief, you skip the anger, you numb the sadness. You package the breakup into something clean and palatable, but healing doesn't come from palatable. It comes from facing the ugliest, most vulnerable parts of the truth and letting them live. It's better this way might help you move on faster, but it won't help you grow, because growth only comes from honesty. From sitting with the discomfort and asking, what did I need that I didn't get? Why did I stay as long as I did? What will I no longer tolerate? And most importantly, what do I still believe about myself that let me think this was the best I could have? The truth might be messier, it might hurt more, but it will also set you free, not from the pain but from the cycle, not from the past but from repeating it. And eventually, maybe one day you'll say it's better this way, not as a lie, not as a shield, but as a real, earned truth, one you arrive at, not one you run to. You say it with conviction, or sometimes with panic. I never said that, you insist, even when the other person remembers it clearly, even when the conversation echoes in their memory. You deny it not to deceive, but to defend. Because admitting you said something hurtful, or messy, or impulsive would mean facing a version of yourself you'd rather not acknowledge. This white lie isn't always about memory, it's about identity. We all like to think of ourselves as consistent, thoughtful, fair. So when someone holds up a mirror and says, you said this, and it doesn't match who you believe you are, the reflex is to reject it, to rewrite the moment, to protect your self-image. Sometimes you genuinely don't remember. The brain is selective. We forget the things that don't serve our narrative. We downplay the moments we spoke from fear, ego, or anger. We reframe the scene in our mind until we're the reasonable one, the misunderstood one, the calm one. And when someone brings it up later, it feels like an attack, so you defend yourself with a lie you almost believe. I never said that. But denial, even soft and subtle, comes with a cost. It erodes trust. It makes the other person question their reality. It turns shared moments into contested truths. And in the long run, it creates distance because people stop bringing things up when they know you'll just deny them. This lie also avoids responsibility. If you didn't say it, then you don't have to apologize for it. You don't have to examine where it came from. You don't have to admit that sometimes you mess up. But without that accountability, there's no growth, no healing, just repetition of the same behaviors, the same fights, the same patterns of defensiveness and withdrawal. There's a deeper fear beneath this lie, the fear of being seen as flawed. You're not just denying a sentence, you're denying what it implies about you, that you can be careless, that your words have weight, that your emotions sometimes leak out in ways that hurt people. And instead of sitting with that discomfort, you escape into the safety of I never said that. But what if you did? What if you said it in a moment of pain or pride or fear? What if it doesn't define you, but it does deserve to be acknowledged? What if owning your words could bring more clarity than denying them ever could? The truth is, we all say things we later regret. It's part of being human. What matters isn't whether you remember it perfectly, but whether you care enough to listen when someone else does. Whether you can say, I don't remember saying that, but if I did, I'm sorry. That wasn't my intention. Let's talk about it. That's what builds connection, not perfect memory, not unshakable image, but honesty, curiosity, the willingness to revisit a version of yourself you don't love for the sake of becoming someone better. Because I never said that might save your pride, but it costs you intimacy. You say it in defense, sometimes even before anyone has accused you. I didn't do anything wrong. It comes out sharp like a reflex, not always because you believe it, but because the alternative feels unbearable. To consider that you might have caused harm, even unintentionally, threatens something deeper than your pride. It threatens your idea of who you are. This white lie is one of protection. It shields you from shame, from the sick feeling in your stomach when someone says you've hurt them, from the weight of accountability when you were only trying to do your best. It's not that you're malicious, most people who say this aren't. It's that you've confused your intentions with your impact. You think because you didn't mean to hurt someone, then you didn't hurt them. And if you didn't hurt them, then you didn't do anything wrong. But that's not how relationships work. People don't experience your intentions, they experience your behavior. And when you cling to the idea that you're blameless, you close the door to understanding their side. You turn hurt into conflict. You make their pain about your guilt. And in doing so, you miss the real point. It's not about who's right, it's about what happened. This lie also creates a wall. It stops conversations before they can start. It makes other people feel like their feelings don't matter unless you agree with them. It makes them hesitant to speak up again. Over time, it creates a dynamic where they silently carry the hurt while you maintain your illusion of innocence. Sometimes you say this because you're afraid of the spiral. You think, if I admit I did something wrong, then I'm the bad guy, then I'm the toxic one, then I don't deserve love. That's the root fear. That one mistake will redefine you, so you fight it. You insist on your version of the story, you get defensive, you argue over details, not because you're cruel, but because you're terrified of being seen as cruel. But doing something wrong doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you a person. And the more you run from your mistakes, the more power they hold. The truth is, most of the damage we cause in life isn't intentional. It comes from blind spots, from assumptions, from repeating patterns we didn't know we had. And the only way to grow is to stop hiding behind the shield of "I didn't do anything wrong" and start asking, how did my actions affect the people I care about? Because accountability isn't punishment, it's the path to closeness. It says, your experience matters. I may not have seen it at the time, but I see it now. That's how you rebuild trust, not by proving you're flawless, but by proving you're willing. When you say, I didn't do anything wrong, what you often mean is, I didn't mean to do something wrong. But those are different things. And if you want to be known, respected, loved, really loved, you have to be willing to face the gap between intention and impact. You have to be willing to hear hard truths without turning them into self-defense. Because no one needs you to be perfect, they just need you to be open. You say it softly, sometimes with a smile, sometimes with frustration. I'm not trying to control anything. You say it when someone pushes back, when they tell you they feel pressured, when your suggestions sound more like commands, or when your expectations quietly begin to shape their behavior. You say it because in your mind you're just trying to help, just trying to make things better, just trying to keep things from falling apart. But control doesn't always look like domination. It doesn't always sound loud. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, wrapped in care. And that's what makes this white lie so slippery, because you believe it. You genuinely don't feel like you're controlling anyone. You feel like you're holding things together, like you're stepping in where others fall short, like you're just keeping peace, creating order, protecting what matters. But underneath that impulse is fear. Fear of chaos, fear of uncertainty, fear of abandonment. Control is often the response of someone who's been let down too many times, someone who's learned that if they don't take charge, no one will, someone who's been hurt by unpredictability and now needs everything to follow a plan, a rule, a script. You say you're not trying to control anything, but you don't feel comfortable when things don't go your way. You feel anxious when others have too much power in a situation. You feel irritated when people make choices that don't make sense to you. So you nudge, you hint, you organize, you over-explain. You justify your reactions as logic, your expectations as fairness, your patterns as just being responsible. And maybe you are, but if other people feel like they can't breathe around you, if they second-guess themselves because they don't want to upset you, then something deeper is happening. This lie also protects you from guilt, because admitting you are trying to control things might make you feel manipulative or toxic or ashamed, but it doesn't have to. Control is often a trauma response, a survival strategy, a way to feel safe in a world that once felt dangerous. The problem isn't that you've developed this pattern, it's that you're refusing to see it. By insisting you're not controlling anything, you avoid the discomfort of asking, why do I need to be in charge? Why do I feel so uneasy when others make choices I would? What am I afraid will happen if I let go? The truth is, trying to control others never leads to peace. It leads to resentment, distance, quiet rebellion, because people can feel when they're being managed even if you don't say it out loud. They feel the pressure even if it's dressed in politeness. They feel the subtle cues, the unspoken expectations, the emotional consequences of defying your plan. And eventually they pull away, not because they don't care, but because they can't breathe. Real safety doesn't come from control, it comes from trust, from knowing that you can handle life even when it's messy, that you can stay even when people disappoint you, that you can love even when it's not on your terms. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means making space for people to be who they are, for situations to unfold honestly, for yourself to rest. So maybe the next time you catch yourself saying, I'm not trying to control anything, stop and ask, then why does it feel like I need everything to go exactly right? Because the moment you can admit that, that's the moment real change begins. You say it like it's noble, like it's selfless. I just want what's best for everyone. It sounds kind, thoughtful, even generous. You position yourself as the caretaker, the mediator, the one holding everyone else together. You convince yourself that your choices are made for the greater good, that you're sacrificing your own comfort, your own wants, your own voice for the sake of harmony. But deep down, this isn't always about others. It's about safety, control, and fear of conflict. This white lie hides the discomfort of saying what you actually want. It masks your inability to tolerate disagreement. Instead of admitting that something hurts you, bothers you, or that you have needs of your own, you wrap your decisions in the language of collective good. You say you're doing it for them, but often you're doing it so they won't be upset with you, so they won't leave, so they won't think you're selfish. The truth is, many people who say this have never really been taught how to put themselves first, without guilt, without explanation, without fear of rejection. And it's not that you're lying on purpose. You may genuinely believe you're being selfless, but when you look closer, the pattern reveals itself. You're constantly managing everyone's emotions, smoothing over tension, avoiding saying no, going along with things you don't fully agree with, not because you're weak, but because you believe peace is your responsibility, that if everyone is happy, you're safe, that if you're useful, you're loved. The problem is this kind of self-erasure doesn't lead to connection, it leads to resentment. Over time, you start to feel invisible, overworked, misunderstood, and yet you keep doing it because being needed feels like being valued. Being agreeable feels like being kind, but that kindness has a cost. When you suppress your own desires long enough, you lose track of them. You start forgetting what you actually want. You forget how to ask. You forget that you're allowed to take up space in a relationship without having to justify it through other people's needs. And then one day someone asks you, "What do you want?" and you don't know how to answer. Because you've built a personality around not having wants, only around being helpful, being easy, being accommodating. You've convinced yourself that your role is to be the one who holds the balance, who fixes things before they break, who absorbs the discomfort so others don't have to. But here's the thing, wanting what's best for everyone only works when you are included in everyone, when your needs matter just as much, when you're not secretly hoping someone will notice your sacrifices and reward you for them, because they often won't. People will take what you give, and they will believe you when you say it's fine. And the more you insist you're okay, the more alone you'll feel. The truth is, you don't have to be everyone's solution. You don't have to orchestrate happiness for people who wouldn't do the same for you. You don't have to trade your voice for peace. Because peace that costs your identity isn't peace, it's quiet suffering. So the next time you say, "I just want what's best for everyone," ask yourself, am I included in that? Because if the answer is no, then it's not kindness, it's abandonment. You say it with a bit of pride, sometimes with bitterness. They're lucky to have me. It's a statement meant to reclaim worth, to remind yourself and maybe them that you bring value, that you stayed, that you cared more than they did, that you did things no one else would have. But beneath that sentence lies a quiet ache, a sense that you've been unappreciated, unseen, taken for granted. This white lie isn't about arrogance. It's about trying to rewrite a narrative where you felt disposable. You repeat it to yourself after they've pulled away, after they've failed to show up, after they've walked out without a thank you or a backward glance. You remind yourself of everything you did, the emotional labor, the forgiveness, the patience. You tally it up like evidence in a trial, trying to prove that your presence should have meant more. And maybe it should have, maybe you were good to them, maybe they didn't recognize your depth, your effort, your loyalty, but this phrase turns your goodness into a transaction. As if the more you give, the more you deserve. As if your worth is something they were supposed to validate with gratitude, commitment, or love. And when they don't, you feel angry not just at them, but at the part of you that keeps giving in the first place. "They're lucky to have me" becomes a way to soothe your ego, to avoid the sting of being left or undervalued. But it also hides the real question. Why do you keep offering yourself to people who don't see you? Why do you overinvest in places where your presence is treated like convenience instead of care? Why do you need to believe they're lucky, when their actions show they never treated you that way? Sometimes we give not out of abundance, but out of a hope that someone will finally stay. We pour ourselves into others so they'll see our value and make it undeniable. But love doesn't work that way. It's not earned by effort. And when you need someone to realize how lucky they are just to have you, it usually means they don't. This lie also puts you above them, morally, emotionally, spiritually. It becomes a coping mechanism to avoid vulnerability. Instead of admitting that you're hurt, that you feel rejected or used, you say, "They're the fools, they lost me." And maybe they did, but the loss doesn't mean you won. It just means you're still trying to make sense of a connection that never matched your depth. The truth is, your value doesn't increase just because someone failed to recognize it, but it also doesn't decrease. You don't need to inflate your importance to feel whole. You don't need to rewrite the story to say they were lucky, when maybe they were just careless, and you were just giving to someone who wasn't ready to receive. You are worthy not because they missed out, not because you tried harder, but because you exist, because your love matters even when it's not returned, because being generous doesn't make you a fool, it makes you brave. So instead of saying, they're lucky to have me, maybe start asking, why do I keep choosing people who need reminding? Because someone who's truly lucky to have you won't need to be told, they'll act like it every single day. You say it with a shrug like you're helpless to do anything else. I'm just too honest. As if truth is something that spills out of you uncontrollably like a reflex. As if it's a virtue that sometimes becomes a curse, that your honesty just rubs people the wrong way, that others are too sensitive, too fragile to handle what you say. But beneath the surface, this isn't always about honesty. It's often about discomfort, about control, about using truth as a weapon instead of a bridge. Because real honesty isn't about saying whatever you want whenever you want. It's not about unloading thoughts without context, without care, without timing. Real honesty requires courage and vulnerability, not just bluntness. But when you say, I'm just too honest, what you often mean is, I don't like sitting in silence when something's wrong, or I need to assert myself before I feel dismissed. It's a way to preempt criticism, to turn what might be harshness into a personality trait. Into something admirable. But honesty without empathy is just cruelty in disguise. When you frame your words as just the truth, you give yourself permission to avoid responsibility for how they land. You act as if there's no other way to speak, like sugarcoating would be dishonest, like restraint would be betrayal, and that becomes the white lie. Because the real reason you say what you say isn't always about truth, it's about power, about self-protection, about not wanting to be misunderstood, so you overcompensate by saying things too sharply, too fast, too soon. This lie also hides fear that if you soften your words, they won't be taken seriously, that if you wait, someone else might speak first, that if you're not brutally honest, your needs won't be heard at all. So you lead with criticism and call it clarity. You offer unsolicited advice and call it transparency. You push people away and call it authenticity. But then something strange happens. The people around you start pulling back, not because you're honest, but because your honesty doesn't feel safe. It feels cold, judgmental, heavy. You notice that people stop confiding in you, that your relationships don't go as deep as they could, that you feel alone even though you've said everything that's on your mind. You think it's because people can't handle your truth, but sometimes it's because they can't feel your heart behind it. The irony is, people who hide behind the phrase, I'm just too honest, are often the ones most afraid of being truly seen. Because being really honest would mean admitting that you don't always know if what you're saying is helpful, that sometimes you speak from frustration, not clarity, that sometimes you use truth as a wall, not a window, and that maybe, deep down, you fear being judged, so you judge first. You don't have to stop being honest, but honesty isn't a blunt instrument, it's a scalpel. It takes precision, timing, emotional awareness. Saying what's true matters, but so does how you say it. And if your honesty is constantly leaving people hurt, shut down, or confused, then maybe it's not the honesty that's the issue. Maybe it's the way you're using it to avoid your own discomfort with vulnerability. Because true honesty starts with this, I don't always get it right, but I'm trying. And that kind of honesty is much harder than just saying what's on your mind. It requires humility, and that's the truth most people won't say, especially the ones who think they're too honest to be wrong. You say it softly like surrender. It's just who they are. You say it after being hurt, disappointed, let down again. It's not angry, it's not even sad anymore, it's resigned. As if you've finally accepted that some people just won't change, that their behavior is simply part of their nature. You say it to make peace with dysfunction, to quiet the voice inside that keeps asking, why would they do that? It's a way to stop the questioning, to stop the pain, to file it all under one label and move on. But this sentence is a white lie, a quiet one, a protective one. It's the lie you tell yourself so you don't have to make a harder decision. Because if it's just who they are, then there's no point asking them to do better. Then there's no point expecting more. Then there's no risk of more disappointment because you've already lowered the bar to the floor. This lie doesn't only protect them, it protects you. It saves you from having to draw boundaries, from having to confront conflict, from having to grieve the relationship you wish you had. Because once you believe that someone is incapable of change, you can stop trying, you can stop hoping. And sometimes stopping hope feels like relief, but it's also a kind of emotional giving up. The problem is, it's just who they are is often an excuse. Not for them, for you. It's what you say when you don't want to deal with the discomfort of saying, this isn't okay. It's what you reach for when you know someone's behavior is harmful, but you still want them in your life. You dilute your expectations until you're left with crumbs, and then you tell yourself crumbs are enough. This lie also traps you in cycles of tolerance. When you believe that people can't change, you stop growing too. You stop imagining better relationships. You stop believing you deserve respect, consistency, emotional safety. And slowly you teach yourself that love means enduring, not thriving, that compassion means silence, that forgiveness means forgetting, but none of those things are true. Sometimes people don't change, sometimes they can't. But often the issue isn't their nature, it's their choices. And if someone consistently chooses to hurt you, dismiss you, manipulate you, or ignore your needs, that's not just who they are. That's how they're treating you. And you have the right to say no to that. You have the right to expect better. You have the right to stop making excuses for someone who keeps showing you that your pain is tolerable to them. It's just who they are becomes dangerous when it stops you from protecting yourself, when it becomes a reason to stay instead of a reason to leave, when it convinces you that your only option is acceptance, even if that acceptance breaks you a little more each time. So ask yourself, who benefits from this lie? Is it really about peace, or is it about avoiding the storm that comes with speaking your truth? Because sometimes real peace only arrives after you stop calling mistreatment a personality trait. After you stop saying, "That's just how they are," and start saying, "That's not who I want to be around anymore." Because you are allowed to love someone and still walk away from who they choose to be. You hear it often, maybe even from yourself. "I didn't mean it like that." It's the phrase you say when someone reacts to your words with hurt, confusion, or disappointment. It's a shield, small, quick, and automatic. It rushes out before you can even think, like an instinct. You didn't intend to offend, to hurt, to be misunderstood. So you reach for this phrase as if meaning well is enough to undo the damage. But this is one of the most common white lies in human interaction, not because it's malicious, but because it subtly shifts the focus from the impact of what was said to the intention behind it. It turns the conversation away from the person who was hurt and toward the person who caused the hurt, and in doing so, it protects ego at the expense of accountability. When you say, "I didn't mean it like that," you're asking for understanding, for context, for a second chance. But sometimes that phrase sounds like dismissal. It says, "Your interpretation is wrong." It says, "You're being too sensitive." It says, "I shouldn't have to feel bad because you felt bad." And that's the hidden white lie, the belief that intent is more important than effect. This pattern is particularly common in close relationships where you assume the other person knows your heart. So when something you say lands badly, you feel shocked and even defensive. "You know I would never mean it that way." But the truth is, knowing you wouldn't mean it doesn't erase the fact that it hurt, that it triggered something, that it created distance, that it made them question the safety of being vulnerable with you. The deeper problem is that we often use this phrase to avoid sitting in discomfort. It's uncomfortable to see someone flinch from your words. It's uncomfortable to admit that what you said, even accidentally, caused harm, so you scramble to explain it away. You focus on what you meant instead of exploring how it felt to them. You clarify instead of connecting, and in doing so, you miss a chance for real repair. Because the truth is, you can hurt someone without meaning to. You can say something rooted in your own pain, bias, or stress that lands badly on someone else's heart. You can be kind-hearted and still say something cruel. And owning that doesn't make you bad, it makes you emotionally mature. It makes you trustworthy. Because people don't need perfection from you, they need accountability. So instead of rushing to say, "I didn't mean it like that," try asking, "How did it feel to you?" Or "Help me understand what hurt." This doesn't mean you're agreeing that your intent was malicious. It means you're prioritizing their experience before defending your position. And once they feel heard, you can explain, but not as a way to escape guilt, as a way to offer transparency and empathy together. This white lie is so tempting because it allows us to protect our self-image. But every time we use it to deflect, we lose a moment of trust. We train the people around us to hide their hurt, to walk on eggshells, to doubt the validity of their emotions. And eventually, that creates more damage than the original words ever did. Being misunderstood hurts, but being invalidated when you're already hurt, that hurts more. So the next time you're tempted to say, "I didn't mean it like that," pause, breathe, ask instead, "Did that hurt you?" Because sometimes the most honest thing you can say isn't, "I didn't mean it, but I see how it did." You tell yourself it's over, you repeat it like a mantra. "I don't have feelings for them anymore." You say it to your friends, to your new partner, to yourself in the quiet moments at night when old memories start knocking. You convince yourself you've let go, that you've moved on, that you're free. But sometimes that sentence is less about truth and more about survival. This white lie isn't always about denial. Sometimes it's about self-preservation, about needing to function, about trying to get through a day without feeling consumed. So you convince yourself the feelings are gone because if they weren't, what would that say about you? That you're weak, that you're stuck in the past, that you're still tied to someone who isn't coming back or never treated you right. Saying I don't have feelings for them anymore becomes a way to claim control, a way to draw a line between who you were then and who you are now. But what you often mean is that the feelings are gone, it's that you've locked them away, that you've pushed them down far enough to keep living. But the body remembers, the heart remembers. Sometimes you see something that reminds you of them, a street, a song, a phrase, and your chest tightens before your mind can stop it. You tell yourself it's nothing, just a reflex. But those reflexes are the shadows of feelings you claim no longer exist. The truth is, emotional detachment doesn't happen on command. You don't stop feeling just because you've decided to. And love, especially if it was once deep, doesn't dissolve cleanly. It lingers. Sometimes it transforms. Sometimes it fades slowly. Sometimes it calcifies into resentment or longing or indifference that you mistake for healing. But underneath, something still lives. This white lie also serves a social function. You say it so others don't worry, so they don't ask questions, so they don't judge. Because the world around you doesn't have patience for lingering feelings. You're expected to move on, to date again, to bounce back. So you play the part, you nod, you smile, you say, it's in the past, even when something inside you still aches. But here's the harder truth. Not having feelings for someone isn't always a prerequisite for moving on. You can still feel something for them and still know you deserve better. You can still love them and still know it's not right. You can still miss them and still choose yourself. Saying I don't have feelings anymore can be a shortcut, but it robs you of the complexity of your own heart. You might be healing, you might be stronger, you might be moving forward, but pretending the feelings are gone when they're not doesn't accelerate the process, it just buries it. And buried feelings have a way of resurfacing in your next relationship, in your self-talk, in your fears about being hurt again. So instead of lying, try this: I still feel something, but I'm not acting on it, or I'm learning to live with it. That's not weakness, that's strength, that's presence. That's the kind of emotional honesty that builds real resilience. You don't owe the world a clean break. You don't have to prove your independence by pretending you feel nothing. Feelings don't define you, your choices do. And sometimes, the most powerful choice is to walk away, not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring more about yourself. It sounds healthy, grounded, mature. You say it with a calm voice, as if you've made a conscious decision to prioritize your growth, your goals, your peace. And maybe that's true. Maybe you really are trying to reconnect with yourself after too much noise, too many disappointments, too many tangled emotions. But more often than not, this phrase is a white lie, not to others, but to yourself. Because I'm just focused on myself right now is the perfect escape hatch. It's how you avoid vulnerability without looking like you're avoiding anything. It sounds like self-care, but sometimes it's just self-protection. You say it when someone asks about your love life, when they wonder why you haven't opened up to anyone new, when they press about the person you used to talk about all the time but now pretend never mattered. You smile and say, I'm just focused on myself, and nobody questions it. Because it's the kind of lie everyone respects. But inside, you know what's behind it. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's grief, sometimes it's disappointment so deep that you no longer trust yourself to want again, because wanting means hoping, and hoping has cost you too much. So you wrap yourself in this sentence like a soft blanket: I'm just focused on myself, and for a while it works. But here's the catch: focusing on yourself should feel expansive. It should reconnect you with your sense of direction, with your passions, with your ability to love yourself and the world again. But if your version of self-focus feels small, tight, guarded, like you're walking around with armor on, then it's not growth. It's avoidance dressed up as healing. You might stop replying to messages. You might stay home more. You might withdraw into routines and productivity to prove to yourself that you're fine, that you don't need anyone, that you're too busy becoming your best self to worry about relationships or closeness. But the truth is, you're still hurt. You're still processing. You still replay old conversations and wonder what went wrong. This lie also helps you avoid admitting that you're still waiting, not actively, not obviously, but a part of you still hopes they'll call, that someone will understand you without you having to explain everything, that you'll feel seen again fully, safely, like you once did or wished you did. And since that feels out of reach, you pull inward and say, I'm just focused on myself, as if that makes the longing disappear. But growth doesn't require isolation. Healing doesn't mean shutting down your capacity for connection. And being focused on yourself doesn't mean pretending you have no feelings for others. You're allowed to say, I'm scared of opening up again, or I don't know how to let someone in without losing myself. Those are truths. They carry weight. They deserve space. Because pretending you're above it all, above love, above disappointment, above needing someone, is not strength, it's defense. You don't have to rush into anything. You don't have to explain yourself to everyone. But if you find yourself repeating this phrase every time someone gets close, every time emotions start rising, every time intimacy threatens your balance, ask yourself, what are you really avoiding? Because you can still be healing and open, you can still be growing and vulnerable, you can still be focused on yourself and make space for others. These things are not opposites, they are parts of the same human experience. The more honest you are about where you really stand, the more likely you are to attract the kind of connection that won't ask you to pretend. You sit with the silence, you check your phone again and again, waiting for a message that never comes. And every time your finger hovers over their name, every time your heart nudges you to say something, anything, you tell yourself, I can't be the one to reach out. You say it like a boundary, like a rule you made to protect your dignity. But deep down, it's not about dignity, it's about fear. Fear that if you make the move, you'll be met with nothing, that they won't respond. That they will, but the message will be cold. That they'll think they've won. That they'll use your vulnerability against you. So you don't reach out, you wait, you convince yourself they should go first. After all, they're the ones who pulled away. They're the ones who didn't show up, who said the wrong thing, who left you hanging. You shouldn't have to be the one to fix it. You shouldn't be the one who cares more, but as the silence stretches, the distance grows, and so does the ache. You keep rehearsing what you would say just in case. You keep imagining how they'd respond, but instead of acting, you tighten your resolve and say again, I can't be the one to reach out. Because if you do, it feels like you're admitting something, that you still care, that you're still open, that you're still hoping, and hoping makes you feel exposed. But here's the quiet truth, this white lie keeps you stuck. It locks you into a power dynamic that no longer matters, because the longer you wait to protect your pride, the more disconnected you become from what you actually want, clarity, closure, or maybe just a human moment of connection. The lie says reaching out is weakness, that silence gives you strength, but all it really gives you is loneliness. Sometimes it's not about who's right, it's not about who left or who hurt who more. Sometimes the question is simpler, do I want to reconnect? If the answer is yes, then silence is just self-sabotage. If the answer is no, then your distance is already the message. But living in the in-between, not letting go, but not reaching out, that's where the suffering lives. And sometimes this phrase is a lie you tell not just to avoid looking vulnerable, but to punish. You want them to feel the weight of your silence. You want them to regret. You want them to notice your absence and chase after it. But the truth is, if they haven't reached out yet, they might not. And continuing to wait in order to make a point just drains you. You're allowed to reach out first. You're allowed to say, this is how I feel. Not because you're weak, not because you're desperate, but because you want to live honestly without playing games that only exhaust you. And if the response is silence, then at least you'll know, at least you'll be free. Reaching out doesn't guarantee the ending you want, but refusing to, just to preserve the illusion of control, ensures you'll never find out what could have been real. And sometimes, peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from finally saying what needed to be said. You think it quietly, you tell yourself you've already given enough signs. You've been there, you've cared, you've stayed late, sent the message, asked the question. You've looked at them the way someone only does when it matters. So when things go wrong, when they hurt you, when they disappear, when they don't show up the way you need, you do confront, don't explain, don't unpack. You just sit with it and say, they should know. As if that's the fair thing, as if silence carries moral weight. But what you're really saying is, I'm not going to risk putting it into words. This lie sounds like emotional maturity, like the refusal to beg for attention or over-explain feelings. It feels dignified, controlled, but underneath it's laced with fear. Because if you have to say it out loud, you're vulnerable. If you say, that hurt me, or I needed you, or I was hoping you'd come, then you risk being misunderstood, dismissed, or worst of all, ignored. So you take the moral high ground, you tell yourself that if they really cared, they'd already know. But people are not mind readers, and love is not a guessing game. Sometimes they genuinely don't see it. Sometimes they grew up around silence too. Sometimes they've learned to look away when things get hard, and sometimes they're just careless. But you never know which, because instead of saying what you feel, you say nothing. And your silence becomes a test they don't even know they're taking. It becomes a pattern you wait for them to notice. You hope they'll bring it up, you hope they'll circle back, and when they don't, you withdraw further. You tell yourself if they cared, they'd ask. But the longer you wait, the heavier it gets. Not because the pain grows, but because the unsaid things rot. They sit inside your body like emotional mold. And every interaction after that is tainted. You smile, but it's colder. You reply, but slower. You love them, but with one hand behind your back. And when it ends or breaks, you tell yourself you were right. They never cared, they never understood me. But you never gave them a real chance to. You gave them clues, hints, vibes, and you expected that to be enough. But emotional fluency requires words. Intimacy requires risk, and if you want people to show up for your heart, you have to open it, not just leave the door unlocked. There is no honor in being the one who never speaks up. There is no nobility in swallowing pain just to look strong. You can't expect someone to hold space for feelings you've never named. And silence, no matter how poetic it feels in the moment, does not build closeness, it builds distance. Real connection begins the moment you say, "This matters to me," and accept that they might not get it, might not meet you, might not know how, but at least then your pain will be real, not imaginary. Your heartbreak will be honest, not built on a lie of omission. Say it, whatever it is, even if your voice shakes, even if it feels small, because they might not know, but you do. You say it with a smile, maybe with a shrug. I don't hold grudges. You say it to show how evolved you are, how past it all you've become. You claim forgiveness as if it's a muscle you've trained to perfection, and maybe you believe it. Maybe you really think you've moved on from what they did, what they said, how they made you feel. But if you slow down, if you look at how you talk about them, how your stomach reacts to their name, how you avoid certain streets or playlists, you'll see it's not gone. You've just buried it. This white lie is subtle because it wears the mask of virtue. It sounds like peace, like emotional maturity, like letting go, but a grudge isn't always loud. It's not always anger or revenge. Sometimes it's the way you detach too quickly, the way you tell yourself you don't care when you obviously do, the way you pretend someone doesn't exist just to stop them from taking up space in your chest. That's still a grudge, just dressed in silence. You might not lash out, you might not gossip, you might even be polite when you see them, but inside there's a wall and the grudge lives behind it. It shows up in your guardedness, your cynicism, your inability to trust someone new who reminds you of them. You say, "I've forgiven them," but you haven't felt the pain all the way through. You skip the part where you admit how much it hurt. You skip the part where you let yourself rage, cry, break a little. You went straight to the exit. Straight to "I'm fine." This lie is often self-protection. If you don't hold grudges, you don't have to confront the people who hurt you. You don't have to risk the discomfort of honest conversations. You don't have to admit how much power someone still has over your memory. But avoidance is not forgiveness, and numbness is not peace. Real forgiveness begins when you acknowledge what was taken, not pretend it didn't matter. Grudges also survive through narrative. You retell the story in your head in a way that makes you feel righteous. They were cruel, you were good, they lied, you stayed true. Maybe that's all correct. But if you keep playing that story again and again without closure, without softness, without release, then the grudge is still alive. It's just frozen in time. Saying you don't hold grudges also protects you from being seen as too sensitive. You don't want to be that person who holds on to things, who still talks about what happened months or years ago, so you smile through it, you call it the past, you say, "It's whatever." But it's not if it still shapes how you love, how you trust, how you show up. You're allowed to be angry, you're allowed to hurt, you're allowed to say, "That changed me," because holding a grudge isn't the problem, lying about it is. Forgiveness doesn't start with pretending nothing happened. It starts with facing the wound without numbing it, without dressing it up. You don't have to let it go all at once. You don't have to forgive before you're ready, but you do have to tell the truth, even if the truth is, "I'm still not over it." That's where healing begins, not with silence, but with honesty, not with erasing what they did, but with reclaiming how you feel. Only then can the weight begin to lift. Only then can your peace be real, not a performance. You said something they didn't like, pointed out a flaw, gave advice they didn't ask for. And when they pushed back, when they looked hurt, when the mood changed, you fell back on the easiest defense. "I was just trying to help." It sounds innocent, generous, kind, like your only crime was caring too much. But if you rewind the moment, if you look at what was really happening, you'll often find something else beneath it: judgment, frustration, maybe even control. The lie here isn't that you helped. The lie is that help was your only goal. Because real help requires consent. It asks first. It checks the timing. It respects boundaries. But what most people call help is really a disguised need to be right, to be needed, to fix something so they don't have to feel powerless. You didn't just want to help. You wanted them to see things your way. You wanted them to change in a direction that made you more comfortable. You wanted them to reflect a version of themselves that caused you less anxiety. And when they didn't, when they stood their ground or recoiled, you retreated into the white lie: "I was just trying to help." This phrase is powerful because it erases the impact of your behavior by highlighting your intention. But impact and intent are not the same. You may have meant well. You may have wanted the best for them. But if what you said made them feel small, judged, or invaded, then it doesn't matter that your heart was in the right place. They don't feel helped, they feel cornered. And often this lie is a mask for control. You say you're helping, but you're really steering. You're correcting, you're shaping someone else into what you think they should be. Not because they asked you to, not because they want it, but because their pain makes you uncomfortable, because their choices feel threatening to your worldview. So you intervene not for them, but for you. And when they resist, you label them ungrateful. You make them feel guilty for not appreciating the help they never asked for. There's also ego in this lie, a belief that you know better, that your advice is not just helpful but necessary, that without your guidance they'll fail, suffer, spiral, so your words come not from love but from superiority. And when they reject it, your ego is bruised, not because they're in danger, but because they didn't validate your insight. Real help is humble, it waits, it asks, it makes space for no. It doesn't demand a thank you or a transformation. It's okay to want to support someone, it's okay to see their struggle and want to step in. But help becomes harmful the moment it becomes about your need to be right, seen, or in control. If you're truly helping, you won't need to defend it. And if you're not, no amount of good intention can disguise that. You keep telling yourself you'll bring it up later, that now's not the time, that it'll sort itself out, that it's not that urgent. And when someone asks, have you talked to them yet? Did you send that message? Are you going to deal with it? You shake your head and say, I'm not avoiding it. But you are, you've been avoiding it for days, maybe weeks, maybe months. You just don't want to admit it, because admitting it means confronting what you're afraid of: rejection, conflict, disappointment, or responsibility. Avoidance is subtle. It doesn't always look like running. Sometimes it looks like busyness, like distraction, like suddenly remembering 1,000 other things to do, like checking your phone right when the hard thought comes up. And the white lie, I'm not avoiding it, helps you sleep at night. It lets you believe you're being rational, pacing yourself, protecting your peace. But deep down, you feel the tension. You sense the growing weight of what's been left unsaid, undone, unresolved. This lie matters because it prevents growth. Avoidance isn't just about what you're not doing, it's about what you're not learning. When you avoid a conversation, you miss the chance to practice honesty. When you avoid a task, you miss the chance to feel capable. When you avoid your own feelings, you miss the chance to understand yourself. You trade long-term clarity for short-term comfort, and comfort eventually becomes a cage. People say I'm not avoiding it because they want to seem strong, responsible, in control, but avoidance is usually about feeling out of control, about fearing what will happen if the truth gets spoken. Will they get angry? Will I look weak? Will I lose something I care about? So instead, you procrastinate and wrap it in noble language. I'm giving it time. I'm just being patient. It's not the right moment. But that moment never comes because you're waiting for the fear to disappear. And fear doesn't leave by itself. It waits for you to act. What happens next is subtle corrosion. The problem doesn't go away, it spreads. You feel more anxious, less confident, your self-trust erodes, your relationships suffer. You start doubting your ability to face life directly. And the worst part, the thing you're avoiding usually isn't as bad as what you imagine. The fear of the thing becomes worse than the thing itself. It's okay to be afraid, it's okay to need a moment, but be honest about it. Say, I'm scared. Say, I'm not ready yet. That truth will serve you more than any denial, because once you admit it, you can work with it. You can move toward the fear instead of being ruled by it. And slowly, avoidance becomes action, fear becomes clarity, and the thing you couldn't face becomes the thing that sets you free. You say it when things get hard, when the room gets quiet, when someone offers help and it makes you feel more exposed than supported. I can handle it alone. It's the sentence you've practiced for years, short, dismissive, final. But behind that sentence isn't strength, it's survival. It's the belief that leaning on people only makes things worse, that needing others makes you vulnerable, that you're safer when no one knows what you carry. This is one of the most seductive white lies because it feels like independence. It feels like self-respect, like resilience, but what it often is deep down is learned isolation. You say you can handle it alone not because it's easier, but because being helped is harder, because somewhere along the line help started to feel like exposure, like risk, like debt. Maybe you were taught that asking for help is weakness, or maybe you did ask once and they used it against you, or they left, or they pitied you, or they tried but got it wrong and you ended up more alone than before. So now you keep it all in. You solve everything in silence. You hurt privately. You break quietly. And you tell yourself this is what strength looks like. But strength without support is just strain. And over time, the lie becomes exhausting. Because even if you can handle it alone, that doesn't mean you should. You become someone who forgets how to receive. Someone who apologizes when they cry. Someone who denies their own overwhelm until it spills out as anger, fatigue, or withdrawal. You pride yourself on not being a burden, but the real burden is believing you have to be invulnerable to be worthy. This lie also stops others from getting close. When you insist on doing it all yourself, you teach the people around you that you don't need them. You create distance not because you want to be alone, but because you're afraid of what closeness might demand. And eventually people stop offering. They assume you're fine, they stop checking in, they stop asking. And then you tell yourself a new lie: no one really cares. But the truth is, most people don't stop caring, they just stop trying when you never let them in. You didn't teach them how to support you. You taught them that support makes you uncomfortable, that you'd rather struggle silently than be witnessed vulnerably. So maybe the next time someone asks, "Are you okay?" and your instinct is to say, "Yeah, I've got it." Maybe you pause, maybe you try a different truth, something small, something real. "I don't know, I'm overwhelmed. I'm tired of holding it all." You don't have to collapse into someone's arms, you just have to let yourself be human. Because being able to handle something alone doesn't mean that you have to, and it doesn't mean that you want to. It just means you've forgotten that being carried sometimes is part of being alive, not a weakness, a right. You say it like a shield, not loudly, not angrily, just firmly enough to end the conversation before it starts. "I don't want to talk about it." And most people respect that. They back off, they give you space, they say okay. But deep down, what you often mean isn't that you don't want to talk, it's that you don't know how. That if you did try to talk about it, you'd lose control, you wouldn't know where to start. Or worse, you'd start and realize that once the words leave your mouth, you'll never be able to put them back. So you use this white lie as a quiet form of panic management. This sentence becomes a habit, a reflex. Anytime something hurts too much or confuses you too deeply or exposes something too raw, you shut it down. "I don't want to talk about it." You convince yourself that silence is strength, that putting it into words will only make it worse, that avoiding it is the best way to survive it. But over time, the thing you don't want to talk about begins to talk anyway, in the way you disconnect, in the way you get irritated for no reason, in the way you sleep too much or not at all, in the way you numb out or lash out. Your silence finds other ways to speak. People believe you when you say you don't want to talk, they take you at your word. But what they don't always see is the white lie inside that sentence, the truth that you do want to talk about it, just not with someone who won't understand, or who will rush you, or who will try to fix it instead of listening, or worse, someone who might use your words against you. So you stay quiet, not because the feelings aren't there, but because you've learned that sometimes speaking them out loud comes with consequences you're not ready to face. This lie is a form of emotional self-protection, and in some cases it makes sense. Not every situation is safe for vulnerability. Not every person earns your story. But when this becomes your default response, when "I don't want to talk about it" becomes a script you repeat even to the people who care, you build walls so high that even you can't see what's behind them anymore. What you lose in that silence is not just understanding, it's connection. It's the chance to be witnessed, to hear your own thoughts aloud and discover that they're not as unbearable as they seemed inside your head. It's the chance to process pain before it hardens into bitterness or detachment. And it's the simple human need to feel like someone is there, not to solve you, not to judge you, but just to sit in the dark with you while you figure it out. So maybe the next time you catch yourself saying, "I don't want to talk about it," you pause, you ask, "Is that true or am I just scared?" And if the answer is fear, that's okay. You don't have to spill everything. But maybe you say, "I don't have the words yet," or "I want to talk, just not now," or even "I'm afraid of what will happen if I open this up." Those are all still hard truths, but they're real ones. And real truth is what turns walls into doors. Because sometimes talking about it is the only way out. It's one of the most silently satisfying lies to tell yourself. They should have known better. You don't say it out loud usually, you just think it, replay the scene, reconstruct the moment. You told them what you liked, you gave hints, you dropped signals, you expected decency, intuition, effort, and they didn't meet it. So instead of saying how it felt, you say this instead: "They should have known." And just like that, you turn confusion into certainty, hurt into moral high ground. This white lie is seductive because it lets you avoid saying the one thing that's most difficult. "They didn't know, and I never really told them." It spares you the vulnerability of saying, "I needed more from them," or worse, "They knew and didn't care." So you create a middle path, a safer illusion where the problem is that they didn't get it, that they lacked awareness, that they missed something obvious. That way the pain isn't yours to hold, it becomes their flaw, their failure, their blind spot. But underneath this lie, what often lives is disappointment and grief. Grief for expectations that went unmet, for care that wasn't reciprocated, for emotional labor that felt invisible. And rather than confront that grief honestly, it's easier to believe that the other person should have just known, that a good friend would have seen you needed help, that a caring partner would have picked up on your silence, that someone who loved you would have seen through the mask. But love isn't telepathy. And care without communication is a recipe for resentment. The truth is, people can't always read what you don't say, and often they're dealing with their own storms, too distracted, too self-absorbed, too emotionally limited to notice what you think is obvious. That doesn't make them cruel, it makes them human. And it doesn't make you wrong for wanting more, it just means the gap between your needs and their awareness has to be bridged by something more than unspoken expectation. The danger of this lie is that it stops repair. Instead of talking through the disconnect, you sit in quiet judgment. Instead of saying, I wish you'd noticed, you say nothing. You let the distance grow. And sometimes you let entire relationships end without ever saying what went unsaid. So maybe the next time you hear yourself say, they should have known better, you ask instead, did I tell them clearly? And if you did and they still ignored it, that's a different pain, one worth confronting directly. But if you didn't, then you owe yourself a harder truth. People only know better when we show them how. You deserve to be known, but that starts with being heard, and no one can hear what you never say. You tell yourself the timing isn't right, that things need to settle, that you need to feel more ready, more sure, more stable. You say, it's just not the right time, as if time is the only thing standing between you and what you want. As if the future holds a perfect version of this moment, one where everything aligns, where no fear exists, where clarity replaces hesitation. But that perfect time never comes because this white lie is not about time. It's about avoidance, self-doubt, and the illusion of safety in delay. It's a lie dressed in logic, because of course timing matters. Of course some things require preparation. But when this phrase becomes your go-to reason for staying still, it's worth asking, is it really about time or is it about fear? Is it about waiting for circumstances to change or about not wanting to feel the discomfort of beginning? You say you're waiting for the right time, but deep down you're waiting for the fear to go away, for the rejection to feel less sharp, for the possibility of failure to shrink, but none of those things operate on a schedule. They don't dissolve with time, they dissolve with action. And so you wait for the conversation, for the apology, for the dream to feel less risky, for love to feel safer. You postpone what matters most not because you don't care, but because you care too much. You fear that doing it now will ruin it, that you'll fumble, that you'll get it wrong, that you'll break something sacred. So you protect it by locking it in the future. You convince yourself that time is the gatekeeper of outcomes, when in reality, it's often just the scapegoat. People don't realize how much life they put on hold with this sentence, how many connections are delayed, how many passions get abandoned, how many truths remain unsaid, because they keep waiting for a time when there will be no resistance, no risk, no uncertainty, but that time doesn't exist. The right time is a myth created by the part of you that wants control, not growth. And here's the cost: every time you say it, the thing you want gets further away, not because it's leaving, but because you are. You distance yourself from it emotionally, you dull your hunger for it, you silence your voice a little more each day. Until one morning you wake up and realize it's too late, not because the right time never came, but because you trained yourself not to act. The truth is, readiness isn't something you wait for, it's something you choose. Most of the time, the right time feels wrong. It's scary, unstable, inconvenient, and that's exactly why it matters. Because the moment you act despite the discomfort, you break the cycle. You stop deferring your life to some imaginary future. You begin. And the beginning, not the timing, is what changes everything. So next time you say, it's just not the right time, ask yourself, is it truly not the time, or is it just not comfortable? You say it with a calm voice, a tight smile, maybe even a laugh. It's all under control. You say it to reassure others, but mostly you say it to yourself. Because inside it doesn't feel like it's under control. Not really. Your mind is racing, your chest is tight, you haven't slept properly in days. But if you keep saying it, if you repeat the line like a mantra, maybe it will become true. Maybe the chaos will quiet down. Maybe the panic will go away. This white lie is your armor. It's how you hide the storm inside. Control feels like safety, like power, like competence. So when things start slipping, when you miss a deadline, forget a commitment, snap at someone you love, you rush to patch it with this phrase. You're holding things together with duct tape and denial, pretending that your mind isn't a tangled knot of unfinished thoughts. And the more people ask how you're doing, the more fiercely you insist. I've got this, I'm fine, it's all under control. But the truth is, nothing feels under control. You're overwhelmed, you're stretched too thin. You've said yes to too much, ignored your own limits, and now you're drowning in obligations you can't keep up with. Still, you refuse to admit it because that would mean you're failing. That would mean you're not as strong as you want to be. So you lie, not to deceive, but to survive. This lie is common among the high-functioning, the dependable, the ones who seem like they have it all figured out, because the world expects them to always be okay, to handle stress gracefully, to never break, so they keep performing the role even as the cracks widen beneath the surface. And sometimes the performance is so convincing that even they start to believe it until the burnout hits. The cost of this lie is silence. You suffer alone, you don't ask for help, you don't say, I'm falling apart. Because admitting that feels like defeat, like weakness, like you're no longer worthy of the image you've worked so hard to maintain. But strength isn't pretending. Strength is honesty. It's saying, I'm overwhelmed, without shame. It's recognizing when things are not okay and choosing to be okay with that. The irony is, the moment you stop pretending to be in control, you actually regain some control. You start making real choices, you delegate, you rest, you prioritize, you breathe, because no one is built to manage everything. No one wins by suppressing their limits. You don't need to be perfect to be valuable. You don't need to be composed to be respected. So the next time the words, "it's all under control," rise to your lips, pause. Ask yourself, is this true, or is this what I wish were true? Because pretending to be okay isn't the same as being okay. And admitting that things are not under control doesn't mean you've lost. It means you're ready to face what's real. And real is always more powerful than perfect. You say you forgave them, you repeat it to friends, whisper it to yourself, carry it like a badge of maturity. I forgave them. It sounds noble. It sounds like you've taken the high road, like you've moved on, but deep inside, something still tightens when you hear their name. A flash of anger, a spike of resentment, a silent flinch in your chest. You say you've forgiven them, but you haven't, not really. You've just buried it deep enough to keep going. And this, quietly, is the white lie that helps you pretend you're healed. Forgiveness is complicated. It's not forgetting. It's not pretending it didn't hurt. It's not erasing the damage. Forgiveness is choosing to let go of the weight, to stop carrying the desire to punish, to stop rewriting the story every time you're alone. But many people confuse silence with healing, distance with closure. They think that not talking about it anymore means it's done, that not reacting means it's over. But resentment has a long memory, and the body remembers what the mouth tries to bury. This white lie usually shows up when you're tired of the pain, when holding on feels exhausting and you want peace. So you skip the process and go straight to the label. I forgave them. You force yourself to act normal around them. You push down the anger, you smile, you nod, you let it pass. But underneath it all, there's a running commentary, how they never truly apologized, how they got away with it, how they still don't understand what they did. You're not over it, you've just put it behind a glass wall. And there's a reason we do this. Real forgiveness is messy. It takes time. It forces you to sit with emotions you don't want to feel: betrayal, helplessness, rage. It asks you to accept that you might never get justice, never get closure, never get the apology you deserve. That's a brutal truth. So instead, we reach for the easier one: I forgave them. It lets us bypass grief. It gives us the illusion of peace without the work. But the cost of false forgiveness is subtle corrosion. You carry the weight anyway. You flinch at similar patterns in others. You become cynical. You build walls that keep out not just danger but intimacy. You protect yourself by shrinking your world, all while saying, I've let it go. Forgiveness doesn't mean the pain disappears. It means you decide to stop living inside it. But that decision must be honest. It must come after you've faced the truth about what they did, how it changed you, and what it cost. Real forgiveness requires grief, anger, clarity. You don't get to skip to peace without walking through the fire. So next time you say, I forgave them, ask yourself, did I really, or did I just stop talking about it? Because forgiveness isn't a sentence, it's a process, and pretending you've finished it before you've even started only traps the pain longer. You hear the criticism, but you say it doesn't affect you. You see them pull away, act cold, withdraw, and you say, it's not about me. You tell yourself their distance, their anger, their silence is about their own struggles, their own baggage, their own unresolved issues. And maybe you're right, but maybe too it is about you just a little. And the truth is you don't really know, because this white lie isn't about clarity, it's about comfort. About protecting yourself from the discomfort of uncertainty, of guilt, of vulnerability. So you wrap yourself in the shield, it's not about me. This phrase sounds mature, detached, almost enlightened, like you're above the drama, but often it's a defense, a way to avoid looking closer. A way to avoid asking the hard question, did I hurt them? Did I fail to notice something? Was there a truth in what they said? Because facing those questions threatens the story you tell yourself about who you are. And so you opt for the cleaner story, the safer one. It's their problem, it's not about me. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes people project. Sometimes they lash out because of their own wounds. But when it's not about me becomes your default answer to every conflict, every rupture, every difficult interaction, you're not being wise, you're being avoidant, you're sidestepping growth. Because not everything is your fault, but some things are your responsibility. And when you take yourself out of the equation completely, you lose the chance to see what you could learn, what you could change, what you could repair. There's also ego in this lie, a need to preserve your self-image, to believe that you're not the kind of person who would hurt someone. So instead of asking, what role did I play? You ask nothing. You brush it off, you keep walking, and something stays broken behind you. This lie is particularly dangerous in relationships. You dismiss patterns, distance yourself from accountability, avoid hard conversations, and all the while your partner, friend, or family member feels unseen. They're reacting to something you said, something you missed, something you forgot, but you've already decided, it's not about me. And just like that, the door to understanding slams shut. Real emotional maturity isn't detachment, it's discernment. It's knowing when something truly isn't about you and when it might be. It's having the courage to say, maybe I hurt them, or maybe I need to change something, without falling into shame. It's staying open to feedback, to complexity, to the possibility that more than one thing can be true. Sometimes, yes, it's not about you, but sometimes it is. And pretending it never is won't protect you, it will just keep you blind. So next time you say, it's not about me, pause, ask, what if it partly is? Not to punish yourself, but to free yourself from the lie that self-protection is the same as self-awareness. You say they understand you better than anyone, that they get you, that they see through your walls. They know me too well, you say, as if that explains everything. Why you don't open up, why you never explain yourself, why you don't speak your needs clearly. Because they know, they've known you long enough, loved you deeply enough, seen your patterns clearly enough. You assume they'll always know how you feel, what you want, what hurts, what helps. You use this belief to justify silence, to excuse avoidance, to avoid responsibility for communicating. And this is where the white lie lives, not in the idea that they understand you, but in the idea that they should always understand you without being told. It sounds romantic, intimate, the stuff of soulmates and lifelong friendships, but often it's a trap, a way to avoid vulnerability. Because if they know you that well, you never need to risk saying what scares you, you never need to spell it out, you never need to ask for what you need because they're supposed to just know. And when they don't, you feel betrayed, misunderstood, hurt, but you never told them. You assumed they would feel it, and when they didn't, you decided they don't care. That they're not as close to you as you thought, but maybe they do care, and maybe you never gave them a chance. This lie often begins in childhood, when you learned that asking for things didn't work or led to shame or made people withdraw. So instead, you learn to hope that people would just notice, that if someone really cared, they would sense your sadness, your longing, your anger. You began to equate love with intuition, and now in adulthood that logic lingers. You think love means being known without effort, but that's not love, that's emotional mind reading, and it's unfair. People are not mind readers, even the ones closest to you, even the ones who have been there for years. People forget, people misinterpret, people get wrapped up in their own lives. If you never say what you feel, they may never know, and still you insist, they know me too well, because it's easier to believe that than to admit you're afraid of being misunderstood when you speak. Easier to expect people to decode you than to risk the awkwardness of expression. This white lie damages relationships slowly. It creates resentment. You feel unseen even though you've hidden yourself. You feel unprioritized even though you never voiced your needs. And the other person feels confused. They sense something is wrong, but when they ask, you say, nothing, you should know. That's not connection, that's a trap. The truth is, even the best relationships require communication. Even the closest friends get it wrong. Even the most intuitive lovers can't guess everything. If you want to be seen, you have to show. If you want to be understood, you have to speak. Not all the time, not perfectly, but clearly enough to give someone the chance to love you right. So next time you catch yourself thinking, they know me too well, pause, ask yourself, have I told them? Have I shown them? Or am I punishing them for not guessing a story I've never said out loud? Because closeness isn't about how much they know without asking. It's about how safely you can tell them everything anyway. You didn't get the job, the person didn't choose you, the opportunity slipped away, and almost instantly you say it. I didn't want it that much anyway. You brush it off. You shrink your desire in real time, you act indifferent, because wanting something and not getting it stings. It makes you feel powerless, small, exposed. So you retreat behind this white lie not to deceive others, but to protect yourself from the sharp edges of disappointment. This is one of the most instinctive white lies we tell, a reflex, a defense mechanism. You pretend it didn't matter so the loss doesn't have to. You rewrite your story mid-sentence. You go from I hope I get this to it wasn't that important in minutes. It sounds like confidence, like detachment, but it's fear. Fear of admitting you cared, fear of being seen trying, because if you didn't try, you can't really fail. And if you didn't care, you can't really hurt. The problem is you did care, you wanted it, you pictured it, you imagined how it would feel if it happened. And now that it hasn't, you're pretending none of that existed. You rob yourself of the truth of your own desire. You bury the version of you that hoped, just to avoid facing the version of you that's hurting. We learn this early. As kids, we're taught not to cry over spilled dreams, to be cool, to act unbothered. Vulnerability gets mocked, punished, or ignored, so we learn to shrink our needs. We learn to smile when we lose, to say it's fine, even when it's not. And over time, this becomes a pattern. We don't just lie to others, we lie to ourselves. But here's what this lie steals: growth. When you dismiss your desire, you don't get to understand it. You don't get to learn from the loss. You don't get to feel the disappointment in a way that deepens your hunger, you just numb it. And numbness doesn't make you stronger, it makes you forget what you're fighting for. There's nothing weak about wanting something and not getting it. There's nothing shameful about hoping and being let down. What is shameful is the way we've been taught to hide our hearts the moment they get bruised, as if failure is something to cover up, not carry with grace. The truth is, sometimes you want something so badly and it still doesn't work out. That's life, that's growth, that's risk. But denying the want doesn't protect you, it just distances you from your own life, from your passions, from your humanity. So next time you don't get what you hoped for, don't rush to say, "I didn't want it that much anyway." Instead, try something harder and truer. "I wanted that, and I'm sad it didn't happen." Because honesty doesn't make the pain worse, it makes it real, and only what's real can be healed. You say you're tired, you say you're drained, you say, "I just don't have the energy," and in many moments that feels absolutely true. You don't have the strength to explain yourself again. You don't want to dig through the emotional rubble of yet another conversation. You don't want to fight to clarify to make the effort. So you say it softly or with a sigh or even as a joke, "I just don't have the energy." And it's not entirely a lie. You are tired, but it's not the full truth either. Because beneath the exhaustion, there is often something else: fear, avoidance, doubt, or quiet helplessness. This white lie isn't about your physical energy, it's about emotional safety. You use the phrase to put distance between you and whatever needs facing. A hard conversation, a personal truth, a buried feeling. You know that facing it will cost you something, maybe conflict, maybe grief, maybe change. So instead you say you're too tired, you delay the moment, you shut the door without slamming it. You give yourself permission to not engage, not by saying no, but by saying you can't. And it works. People nod, back off, accept it. They're just tired, they think, but the more you say it, the more you start believing it. You stop investigating what's really underneath the fatigue. Maybe you're afraid to disappoint someone. Maybe you don't want to admit you're lost. Maybe you don't know how to respond without unraveling. But instead of asking those questions, you reach for the phrase that no one will challenge: "I just don't have the energy." This white lie often appears in relationships, when you know something needs to be said but you don't want to carry the consequences. You avoid checking in with people you miss. You delay answering difficult texts. You stop reaching out to resolve tension. You stop initiating because it's easier to wait than risk rejection. And you label it all as exhaustion, but if someone asked, "Tired from what exactly?" you might not know what to say. There's also an identity comfort in this phrase. It paints you as someone overwhelmed, not unwilling. It protects your image. You're not cold, not distant, just tired. You're not shutting them out, just saving your energy. You're not giving up, just resting. But deep down, you know some part of this is avoidance dressed as self-care. This isn't to say that you're never genuinely tired. Life is draining, and burnout is real. But if you find yourself saying, "I don't have the energy," every time something matters, every time something feels risky, every time your heart is involved, then maybe it's not about energy. Maybe it's about fear, or resignation, or emotional backlog that never got cleared. Because the truth is, we often find energy for things we believe are safe, things that feel hopeful, things that seem worth the risk. So if your energy is always low around a particular person, situation, or truth, maybe it's not energy that's missing, maybe it's trust. So next time you say, "I don't have the energy," ask yourself gently, is that really why I'm holding back? Or is that just the name I'm giving to the weight I don't want to face? Because honesty doesn't always give you more energy, but it gives you direction. And sometimes, that's the only strength you really need. Tell yourself you won't chase, you won't beg, you won't double text, you won't reach out first, you won't be the one who cares more. "I'm not chasing anyone," you say, as if this is strength, as if withholding is power. You convince yourself that whoever wants you will prove it, that if someone truly cares, they'll come to you. You sit back, arms crossed, waiting. And the longer nothing happens, the more you pretend that's what you wanted anyway. But deep down you ache, you want connection, you want to be seen. You just don't want to be the one exposing your need. This white lie is born from pride, but also from pain. Somewhere in the past, you chased too hard, you gave too much. You showed your cards too early and got hurt. And now your armor is made of silence. You equate initiative with humiliation, vulnerability with weakness. You tell yourself that being chased means being wanted, and anything less is unworthy. But the truth is, connection requires motion. Someone has to take the first step. Someone has to break the silence. And if both people are playing the same game of indifference, nothing ever happens. Nobody wins, and both walk away, thinking the other never cared, when in reality, both were just scared. I'm not chasing anyone sounds like self-respect, but often it's fear wearing a confident mask. The fear of rejection, of embarrassment, of being seen as too much. So you stay silent, you let conversations die, you suppress your desire and rebrand it as independence. You rewrite the story not because it's true, but because it hurts less that way. But ask yourself, is refusing to chase really making you feel empowered, or is it making you feel lonely? Because there's a difference between not chasing and not trying. There's a difference between self-worth and self-sabotage. Sometimes, what you call dignity is just fear of disappointment disguised as boundaries. This lie also fuels misunderstanding. People who care about you may interpret your silence as coldness. They may assume you don't value them. They may back away, not because they've stopped caring, but because you never gave them a signal to come closer. And so, a cycle begins, two people protecting themselves from rejection by pretending not to feel. Real strength is not in refusing to chase. It's in knowing when to reach out anyway. It's in letting yourself care even when it's scary. It's in risking vulnerability because connection is worth the risk. Chasing doesn't mean begging. It doesn't mean losing yourself. It means choosing to show up first if needed. So next time you say, I'm not chasing anyone, pause, ask yourself, what if they're thinking the same thing? What if we're both waiting to be chosen first? Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to walk away, but to step forward, even if your voice shakes, even if it doesn't work out, even if you're tired of being the one who cares more, because that's how real connection begins, not in silence, but in motion. You've built it carefully, piece by piece, the distance, the caution, the self-control. Every time someone got too close, every time something felt risky, you pulled back just enough to feel safe again. And now when someone asks why they can't really reach you, why you seem distant or hard to read, you say what feels simplest. I can't let my guard down. It sounds like a rule, a fact, a safety measure. But beneath it, there's a softer truth. You're not protecting yourself from others, you're protecting yourself from the pain of needing others. The guard isn't just up, it's welded shut. This white lie works because it's true enough. You do feel unsafe. You do fear what might happen if someone sees your softness, your fear, your messy truth. But I can't let my guard down makes it sound like the danger is outside of you when often it's inside. It's the danger of depending on someone and being let down, of opening up and not being understood, of wanting too much and being met with less. The guard is not a shield from others. It's a shield from your own vulnerability. You weren't born this way, you learned it. Maybe someone left when you needed them most. Maybe you opened up and got hurt. Maybe you trusted the wrong person. Maybe it happened enough times that your nervous system started to associate closeness with risk. So now you keep your smile in place. You answer honestly but not deeply. You share selectively. You tell people you're fine even when you're unraveling. And when they ask for more, you tell them, I can't let my guard down, as if you've tried. As if you ever really got to feel what it's like to be fully seen. But here's the paradox. Keeping your guard up doesn't prevent pain, it guarantees it. Because when you block the hurt, you also block the joy, the intimacy, the warmth, the belonging, and that quiet ache of isolation you feel at night. It's not just loneliness, it's the weight of all the moments you could have said how you really felt and didn't. And often this lie isn't about the present, it's about the past leaking into the now. The person in front of you might not be dangerous, they might not be cruel, they might actually be safe, but your nervous system is still wired for war. It doesn't see them, it sees them, so even kindness feels threatening. Even love feels like a setup. Even honesty feels like a trap. And instead of saying all this, you just say, I can't let my guard down. But saying that turns the pain into permanence. It makes it sound unchangeable, as if the guard is built into who you are instead of what you've been through. And that's what makes it a lie, not because you're not afraid, but because you're pretending the fear is fixed. You can let your guard down, but it will be hard. It will feel like standing in the rain without an umbrella. It will feel raw, awkward, unnatural. You'll want to retreat. You'll scan for signs of danger. You'll feel every word echo inside you, waiting to be used against you. But then one day, if you're lucky, someone will stay, someone will hold space, someone will hear the truth and not flinch. And in that moment, your guard won't just drop, it will dissolve. So maybe next time, don't say I can't, say I'm scared, say I'm trying, say I don't know how yet. That's how the wall begins to crack. That's how you stop protecting yourself from the very thing you long for most, closeness. You walked away, or maybe they did. Either way, it ended with silence. And instead of grieving out loud, instead of admitting how much it hurts, you say the thing that makes the ache feel a little more noble. They'll miss me eventually. It's not begging, it's not reaching, it's not admitting need. It's a quiet kind of revenge fantasy, the hope that your absence will echo so loudly in their life that one day they'll regret letting you go. But under the surface, it's not about them missing you. It's about you not knowing what to do with your missing them. This white lie is made of dignity and denial. Dignity because you're trying to hold your head high. Denial because you're secretly replaying every moment, wondering if there's still a way back. But instead of reaching out, you sit in silence and tell yourself they'll come around, that the memory of you will bloom over time, that one day they'll wake up and finally see what you were worth, that their next relationships will only remind them of how much better it was with you. And sometimes that happens, but most times it doesn't, because people don't remember you based on how you left. They remember you based on how they experienced you. And if something in them wasn't ready, wasn't open, wasn't aligned, your absence won't teach them what your presence couldn't. This lie also delays healing, because as long as you're waiting for them to miss you, you're still tied to them. You're still imagining your worth through their eyes. You're still building a fantasy where closure comes from the outside. But closure that depends on someone else's longing isn't closure, it's emotional dependency in disguise. Saying they'll miss me eventually feels powerful because it shifts the focus away from your pain and onto theirs. But that shift is a trick. It keeps you from dealing with your own heartbreak. It gives you something to hope for when you don't know how to move forward. It makes you believe that your silence is a strategy, when in truth, it's just silence. And the worst part, even if they do miss you, it doesn't mean they'll come back. Missing someone isn't the same as changing for them. Regret isn't the same as action. And longing isn't love. You might get the apology. You might get the late-night message. You might get the confession years later that you were the one that got away. But by then, it won't undo the waiting. It won't refill what went empty inside you while you waited for them to feel something they weren't ready to feel when it mattered. So maybe the truth is they'll miss me eventually. Maybe it's I miss them now. Maybe it's I wish they saw me differently. Maybe it's I don't know how to stop hoping. Those are hard things to say, but they're honest. And in that honesty, you get something the white lie could never give you, your power back. Not the power to control what they feel, but the power to reclaim what you feel, to stop waiting, to stop hoping they'll miss you enough to make it right, and to start missing yourself less in the process. Because the real tragedy isn't that they don't miss you. It's that you lost so much time trying to be missed instead of being healed. You tell yourself this after doing something kind, after checking in first, forgiving easily, helping when they didn't ask, giving more than you received. And when it goes unnoticed, when the message is left on read, when the favor is forgotten, when the kindness is treated like routine, you swallow the lump in your throat and say it quietly, maybe only to yourself, I didn't expect anything in return. But that's not true. You did expect something. You just didn't let yourself admit it because you wanted to be the kind of person who doesn't need anything back. This is one of the most socially accepted white lies in existence. We say it to sound generous, emotionally evolved, selfless. But true selflessness isn't about pretending not to have needs, it's about giving with awareness of those needs. Saying you didn't expect anything back is not humility, it's fear. Fear that admitting your hope for reciprocity will make you seem needy, manipulative, or weak. But every act of care carries a quiet question underneath. Will you see me for this? Not reward me, not owe me, just see me. Recognize the effort, hold space for the intent, make the giving feel meaningful, not invisible. So when people don't return that, when they act like your effort was expected, or worse, like it never happened, you feel the sting. And instead of processing that disappointment, you use the white lie. You tell yourself you were above expecting anything. You tell yourself it was all unconditional, but unconditional doesn't mean unacknowledged. It doesn't mean you don't feel hurt when your kindness is met with indifference. This lie also lets other people off the hook. When you say you didn't expect anything, you give them permission to keep taking. To believe the relationship is one-sided by design, that you're always okay, always fine, always available until you're not, until you burn out, until your quiet hurt becomes distance and they're shocked by the change, because they believed you never expected anything. The danger of this lie is that it turns your emotional needs into secrets, even from yourself. You become someone who keeps giving while quietly erasing their own needs. You make generosity your identity, so you feel guilty the moment you want anything in return. And that guilt makes you stay silent even when you're hurting. But the truth is, wanting something back isn't wrong, it's human. Relationships aren't transactions, but they are built on reciprocity, not in the form of perfect balance sheets, but in mutual awareness, mutual presence, a shared sense that what you give flows both ways, maybe not always equally, but honestly. So maybe next time, instead of saying, I didn't expect anything, you try, I hope they would care as much as I did, or I needed to feel seen, or even just, I wanted to matter. Those truths might feel scary to admit, but they will keep you honest, not just with others, but with yourself. Because pretending not to care doesn't protect you from pain, it just hides you from connection.